Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Mark was an avid jogger. There was nothing he enjoyed more than going through his ritualistic stretching exercises, and in his running suit, which clung to his body, his athletic body, like a glove. With the potency of a sportsman, he would take his run. It was ineffably an exhilaration for him, invigorating to put his feet on the trail and go for it. He primarily ran the same trail every day. This would assure him a great run, eschewing any of the pitfalls of the lesser trails, which he purposely avoided. He'd heard rumors about some of the other pathways that they were simply far too dangerous to run due to steep precipices, sharp cliff faces with unsteady rock, uneven terrain with unmanaged potholes, even dangerous animals on the track such as bears, wolves, and moose were common. The place where he chose to run did not have any of these dangers, and he never felt as though he was running on the cusp of indeterminate declivity or teetering on the edge of bottomless ravines. He had no interest in exploring the chasms of the unknown, nor putting himself in perilous situations unnecessarily. He'd known a couple of runners who had met with tragedy due to the elements. He was not about to fall victim to some sort of testosterone-fueled challenge. He ran for enjoyment, not necessarily for his health. He knew the benefits of raising the heart rate during exercises, but Mark honestly didn't correlate what he did with being physically fit. He regarded it as a meditative event that kept his mind purposed, a type of therapy, with the intent of wellness, of thought, and mental sustainability. Regardless of the weather, Mark was never complacent and, with due diligence, committed to his run. Well hydrated and geared up, Mark set out on his 1-hour run. He enjoyed running in the evenings as the day was cooling, and by the time he had made his traverse, he was facing the sunset, which he truly loved to see. This day began unremarkably, and nothing even now appeared out of the ordinary. He'd already covered 2/3 of the track and was coming out of the verdant canopy of trees when something outlandish and extraordinary presented itself. Mark was stopped cold in his tracks, his resplendent evening getting a rude awakening. He simply couldn't continue, and he looked for a quiet, unostentatious way of avoiding what he saw before him blocking the trail. As he stared at the alpha male wolf, who was clearly unwell, he shuddered with a sense of dread that one experiences only a couple of times in life. This comparison of healthy and sickly was made in Mark's mind by recalling nature programs he'd seen in the past on wolves and their behavior. Wolves ran in packs, but this was a lone wolf. Wolves are supposed to fear man, but this one's posture was that of dominance. This was an imposing situation that Mark had never found himself in. Well, ever. The wolf was a magnificent beast. It was a dark color with keen eyes that stared directly into Mark's fearful gaze. It was reputed that wolves feared humans, but this forbidding beast showed no signs of drawing back. It had never occurred to Mark that any dangerous animals would be on this favorite trail of his, so he had made no preparations for such an occurrence, nor was he very good at improvising. He had no weapon, no bear spray, not even a pocket knife. Before Mark could gather his thoughts and collect his courage from the nethermost area of his mind, the wild beast charged Mark in such an unimaginable way, with such ferocity and quickness. Mark had no time to think, to turn, to run, or have a chance to defend himself. The fight was all wolf, at least, until the point at which Mark swore it unnaturally raised upon its hind legs like a man. In this unusual lycanthrope stance, the jaws of the mighty savage chomped down into Mark's arm, and its canine teeth, like daggers, pierced his skin to the bone. The weight of the wolf and its momentum had driven Mark to the ground, and there ensued a brief wrestling match, with Mark attempting to protect his face and guard against further injury. The wolf didn't continue the attack and fled, leaving Mark wounded and bleeding. With a beating heart that seemed to want to either leap from his throat or tear free from his pounding chest, Mark staggered along, trying to reconcile what had just happened to him. He knew he was in shock and desperately wanted to make it home before the shock wore off, because he feared the real pain had not come upon him yet. In his presence of mind, he removed his shirt, wrapped it around his bloody arm, and, without delay, worked his way home. By the time he made it to his door, he was dizzy and somewhat lightheaded. He went straight to the kitchen sink and ran water over the penetrating bite marks. Although it stung with a considerable sharpness, he was most thankful that the thing had not ripped his arm off. Why he didn't go straight to the hospital, even he didn't know, but he opted to treat the wound himself with peroxide and antiseptic cream. He made the conscious decision to stay home from work to allow his arm to heal. On the third day of self-treatment for the bite, he felt a tingling, like a prickling sensation around the bite area, and it itched something terrible. He'd become restless and felt like climbing out of his own body. He knew he had the flu, he just knew it. But then again, as he relived the attack in his mind, his thoughts stirred with a real worry. The wolf stood upright to attack him. This was a strange, unordinary way for any wolf to go after prey, and then the unimagined crossed his mind. Maybe this was no ordinary wolf at all. As inconceivable as it sounded when he repeated it, he in fact did repeat the word werewolf from his lips several times. He considered the indescribable event, and he couldn't imagine what else could possibly be. It was unfathomable, he reminded himself, yet he believed he could sense a change in his body. He had a headache that was persistent but not throbbing, a fever, but he wasn't burning up, nauseous, but he had not thrown up, and seemingly he was more agitated than usual. He no longer had a vague suspicion. He convinced himself that this was no flu. He'd been attacked by a werewolf, and now he was changing into such a beast. Mark was running over the brim with anxiety and worry. He didn't know how being a werewolf would affect his life, his work, or even hanging out with the few friends that he did have. How would they feel if they knew the truth of the matter? He had to keep this a secret from the whole world, to be inflexible and obdurate and trust no one. He knew there was no reversal of such a chemical alteration and transformation to his DNA, so he secured his reluctance and was inclined to accept what was happening to him. He was in uncharted waters now, the sepulchral depths over his head. The unknown was before him, and he wanted to face it unperturbed if at all possible. After a few days, he wrestled with insomnia and refused to sleep because he wanted to be aware of the change when it came. He checked his teeth daily to see if there were any noticeable signs that his canine teeth were becoming longer. He didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but again, this was new to him, an indiscernible mystery. He stuck out his tongue in order to see if it had grown in length. It had not. He examined his body, supposing that he'd begin to grow hair in unusual places in the anagen phase, but didn't see any signs of new follicles. Possibly it was a progressive disease. He was now calling it a disease. He thought transmutation would only take hours, but now he was going into days, and the metamorphosis seemed to be a much slower growth than what he had anticipated. Mark finally left his house to pick up some things from the store. He didn't like the thought of canine sustenance, but he figured if he were going to be a werewolf, he possibly needed dog food for sustainability. He didn't want to kill humans. He struggled with the thought. But what if he wasn't a proper werewolf and more like a mutt, a mongrel, or a cur dog? He hadn't been bitten by relatives, so he had no real pedigree. He feared he might not be a complete werewolf, and he might become a hound, a mixed breed with purebred ancestry. Would this mean he wouldn't be accepted by other werewolves? Essentially, if this were the case, he might be doomed, having to hide and shelter among others damned by the same malady. He also fantasized what it could be, considering that he was the lone wolf without a pack who would search for a mate, and together they would be the key to the genetic survival of the species. A lone wolf is the strongest wolf because it hunts for itself and is hardened by the time and solitude. Once home, he had the sensation that he needed to chew on something. He was positive that if he accelerated the process along, hurry it, so to speak, he'd change much quicker. If he acted like an animal while the fluids in his body transformed into the DNA of a wolf, in all certainty, he was confident it would progress things along at a more expedited rate. Thankfully, when he purchased the bag of dry dog food, he bought a rubber bone just in case this sort of thing happened. Mark gnawed on this dog toy while salivating profusely. He practiced growling, and it was during this lunacy that he had an idea. Maybe the conversion into a full-blown werewolf needed to happen under the light of a full moon. Ignoring sensibilities and all practicalities, he resorted to checking his calendar in the kitchen and easily noted that the next full moon would be tomorrow night. He was thrilled that it could be that soon. At that moment, he hadn't slept at all and was feeling decrepit. His muscles ached, and he assumed that as his human form was changing, he would find it a painful, maybe agonizing, miserable process. Mark prepared a bowl of dog food to eat and sat at the kitchen table. He convinced himself he needed to start living like a werewolf because the more he practiced the mannerisms, the more practical the character of the wolf inside would reveal itself. In order for the indecipherable change to occur, he understood that his central nervous system would be readily affected, and that he might even begin to think as a wolf thinks. Those were his thoughts as he popped individual bits of dog food into his mouth and forced hard swallows. He didn't know if it was the dryness of the food itself, the thought of actually eating dog food, or if his throat was swollen, but he was having difficulty swallowing. Against his better judgment, he retrieved a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet along with a glass of water. Mark drank the glass of water, and then, in an attempt to knock himself out so he could rest for tomorrow's big manifestation when he would become a full-fledged werewolf, he nursed the bottle for the next couple of hours, knocking it back until he was inexorably as drunk as a skunk. If the symptoms of changing into a nocturnal creature of the night were not already challenging, Mark was not a good person while intoxicated, nor was he an exemplary human being. For reasons unknown even to Mark, instead of trying to sleep, he decided he needed to go hunting. He walked outside into the evening air, and his inebriated self sniffed the air, hoping his canine sense of smell had developed. But he was unable to pick up those smells that he knew a dog must have. They were indistinct. Staggering along, lost in fascination, uncertain of his destiny, he walked the stony path, insatiably smitten with the idea of biting someone. As outrageous as it sounded, he persuaded himself that practice made perfect. His unassailable conclusion was that he believed he was turning into a werewolf, but that he would retain his human qualities. These were ontologically distinct from one another, meaning he might be in conflict with himself according to which aspect was more dominant. He spotted a woman walking alone. He said to himself, easy target. He used no prestidigitation, no sleight of hand or tricks, nor did he use camouflage or concealment. Committing a purely rookie mistake, he mindlessly charged the woman, mouth open, growling pathetically, and lunged at her. She was carrying an umbrella, which he had failed to determine before the unwitting assault. She whacked him several times across the top of the head, using both hands masterfully to repel the would-be debutante werewolf, and fending off the assault, pummeling Mark without hesitation, causing him to scamper away with his tail between his legs, so to speak. His own carnal actions and behavior repulsed him. Sitting in a furtive area of the woods, he knew he had done the most foolish thing he could have done. The woman would have seen his face, would have been able to describe him in every detail. He needed to make his way back home. He decided to pass through the forest for the cover, running along the backs of the houses that faced the main highway. The vegetation was dense, but he was well hidden from sight. Distinctly, he heard the sound of chickens. Insatiably, he felt a vestigial flicker, and his appetite whetted again. The urge to feed was upon him, smothering his intellect, which aroused the instinctual qualities of the beast he saw within. He followed the clucking until he spotted the henhouse. Stealthily, he moved with the twilight of the evening closer and closer until he reached the fenced-in area. He probed his teeth with his finger, but he had not grown longer canine teeth yet. Disappointed, he lamented impotently, but he was not dissuaded. He opened the unlocked gate to the chickens and sneaked inside. His plan was to snatch a hen, wring her neck, and smother the fowl, then chow down. When he entered the coop, the chickens were nesting idly. Completely out of character and positively unethically, he grabbed hold of the first hen with both hands. There was an infusion of mayhem and incomprehensible chaos ensued, which seemed like an interminable duration of time, but in reality was only a few short seconds. Every chicken in the coop, sensing a predator and that danger was in their midst, took to flight, flapping their wings, cackling loudly, and pecking away at Mark, who let loose the hen he had momentarily seized. The only thing now for him to do was to retreat and free himself from the confined space, which he did expediently. With chicken feathers matted to his hair, he had no choice but to take to the woods again. He had to be clandestine, because by now surely the woman had reported the attack, and the chicken farmer may have seen him sprinting for cover. Without detouring, he made it home in one piece. He was traumatized by the fowl attack, because he never knew chickens would and could fight back. He dismissed this as an amateur move on his part, and told himself that he would learn to be a fantastic werewolf over time. Besides, tomorrow was full moon, and it would be then he would reveal his ultimate potential. Still, with fever and a sickening headache, he somehow managed to sleep, and in his dreams he was seen reveling in unholy celebration with others likened to himself. In grand extravagance, he was the master of ceremonies at this appointed time, and he found effectual comfort in knowing he'd been readily accepted as one of them. When he finally awoke, he was, as they say, sicker than a dog. He was now burning hot to the touch with fever, and his muscles were seizing up. The uninterrupted dream had given him hope, but he was disturbed by the enhanced symptoms. Quickly, he forced down a handful of dog food, which he ate from a bowl, on all fours while on the kitchen floor. He lapped water from the second bowl, but had an impossible time swallowing. He was convinced that these severe flu-like symptoms were all part of his changeover into a wild, untamed beast. He told himself it was imperative to make it to the trail this evening, and there he could relinquish his identification as human, as a mere man, and embrace this moment of imputation he now longed for. His soul would experience the consummation with the animal mutating within, and without portent he would humbly allow himself to become that which all men fear. He repeated these things in his head and hoped for an acceleration of the process. His human side was dying for sure, and he needed the wolf to be fully, maturely born. He wanted desperately to see through the eyes of the wolf, to hear the sounds amplified and defined. He wanted to unmute the sense of smell and to inhale and breathe through powerful lungs, to discern the scents and identify recognized odors of the world in a supernatural way. He wondered if he'd remember himself as a human after the complete transformation had occurred. He was compelled by a feeling of sorrow that he may not remember the past. However, it would be a new life, a new way of adventure that he had never known before. As the sun was setting and the day was expiring, Mark tenuously proceeded to the running track, which would take him far into the forest. By this time he was gaunt, feeble, emaciated, and his face shriveled and ghostly pallid, with a frozen, sallow expression. He smelled of putrescent dissolve, like something which had crawled from an immemorial burial site and needed immediate fumigation and cleansing. But that had to wait. He wondered if the final change would hurt. He imagined that it would. He self-proclaimed himself as a visionary and saw himself grotesquely contorted, broken, bones protruding while shape-shifting, thrashing about and uncontrolled convulsions, raising the wolf from dormancy while his bones exploded into stronger, more durable ones. His joints surely would be unimaginably aching as they swelled to fit the new and improved body. His skin, the largest organ of the body, would rip and tear, then peel away, and he would emerge a terror for all to see. This new life would be the validity he foresaw in his dreams. He no longer would have to scrutinize his existence, for he would know exactly what he was. He was willing to be dissolved or absorbed so that he would gain the sight that the wolf had, that fiery dilation of eyes that he saw days ago. He longed for the instinctual fortitude and the erudition of the beast undisturbed. When he made it to the spot where he had been bitten, which was on a very high plateau, he saw the moon was full and nearly at its lunar zenith. His thoughts were scrambled and he ponderously swore, while in a haze of confusion, that he saw the same wolf that had bitten him. But in peevish discontent his eyes were blurred, and he staggered and swayed carelessly, invoking the unnamed spirit of the wolf. "Come forth from me! Appear!" Mark reached out his hands toward the moon. "I am the species, the canis of a new morning." He felt the abruptness of the wind and believed it was answering him. Mark howled vigorously, and it unfolded poorly, like a desperate plea to be put down. He howled again, pathetically, then gasped for breath. He went down on his knees and held his head in his hands. He prayed that his cranium would swell, expand to receive the wolf inside. Dyspeptically, he fell to one side, moaning and groaning in agonizing pain. Guttural calls to his kin rumbled from what life was left in him. He gave a derisory whimper and began to whine like a nervous dog, whose owner left and had never returned. Now he prayed for the silver bullet to the heart to erase his suffering, to make it all go away. Lycanthropy never occurred. Mark never did become a beta wolf, for he had never been bitten by a werewolf. He was bitten by a rabbit wolf with full-blown rabies. Under the brightness of the full moon, Mark's howling and pleas for transformation ceased. This furious episode had ended, first with Mark's partial paralysis overwhelming him, causing him to crumble under his own weight. Then hallucinations laid siege to and conquered his reality. Mark cradled his knees to his chest in the fatal position, without remedy for the rabies he had endured in obscurity, alone in dreary discourse with himself, convinced until the end that he would howl once more.
Twilight found us crouched in place, waiting. A fence topped with razor wire towered ahead of us, and beyond that lay a wide field, tall grass swaying gently in the evening breeze. On the far side was a house, dark and empty. There was also a barn, shuttered and locked up tightly for the day, and 3 long industrial coops, each the size of a double-wide trailer, ominous black rectangles with no windows. The camouflage was excellent. To those who didn't know better, it would look like any other mid-sized poultry farm. Someone even thought to stick a folksy homemade WSU Cougars football sign in the yard, right beside a larger, more professional one that proclaimed "Shrike Birds, best breaths in the business." Silently we waited. Darkness fell onto the world, sudden and heavy as a brick. There was no moon. At Jack's signal, we moved through the hole Abdul cut in the fence. I paused, watching the action in night vision shades of green and gray on my video camera's LCD screen, trying not to focus too closely on Shayna's fantastic denim-clad backside as she slipped through the gap with enviable ease. Then I fumbled through myself and ran to catch up. This wasn't the most embarrassing thing I'd ever done to impress a girl, not even close, but it was definitely the most illegal. Keeping low in the tall grass, we did our best to hurry across the open ground. If we would be caught, everyone agreed this was the most likely place. Jack was in front, as usual, looking obnoxiously handsome and fit. The guy even took the time to gel and perfectly style his hair for the clandestine occasion. Abdul followed him closely, the only one of us who moved like he knew what he was doing. Shayna, her usually chaotic mane of dark dreadlocks tied together at the neck tonight, was next. And yours truly, camera held in front of my face, already breathing hard and trying desperately not to trip, brought up the rear. Maybe my checkered Vans were an unwise choice, but the only other shoes I owned were flip-flops. We reached the first of several small outbuildings and huddled out of sight, eyeing the guard as he passed on his normal route at precisely the normal time. Although we had observed the man going about his work from afar through binoculars and camera lenses times before, up close he was younger than I thought. It made me a little uneasy, truth be told. But Abdul raised his big mag light without hesitation and brought it down on the guard's head, crumpling the poor guy like a pile of laundry. I couldn't help but wince, the reality of what we were doing hitting home at last. Jack snapped his fingers, hissing, "Camera!" and I swung the lens around to focus on him, dutifully playing my part. While Shayna and Abdul moved the guard behind the building and tied his hands and feet, Jack, oozing community theater charisma, looked into the lens and began his speech.
It's July 3rd, nearly midnight. We have exactly 29 minutes before the guard is expected to check in at the security shack. When he does not, the alarm will sound. By then, we'll already be gone and the world will know the truth.
He paused to run a hand dramatically through his thick black hair.
We have used the reduced staffing schedule of the holiday weekend to successfully infiltrate the highly secret Shrike Foods test farm just outside Walla Walla to uncover the unethical and illegal treatment countless turkeys are forced to endure as a part of the company's so-called poultry improvement project. The horrors of industrial meat processing are well known and extensively documented elsewhere, but the atrocities committed against the animals at this farm have been taken one step further with the aid of nefarious and unregulated science. Next, we will enter Coop 3, where a knowledgeable informant assured us the living results of Shrike Foods' unlawful genetic modification experiments are housed.
He slid an open hand across his throat, and I paused the recording.
"All right,"
Jack said.
"Let's do this."
I felt my attention drawn back to the bound guard. He really was just about our age. I figured the guy had probably done a few stupid things of his own to impress girls. Probably had a mountain of his own student debt to worry about, too. "Well," I said, "shouldn't you, I don't know, maybe turn him over? Like onto his belly? I mean, he could puke and die or something, right?" Shayna looked to Jack, who sighed and nodded at Abdul, who kicked the unconscious guard onto his stomach, eyeing me with undisguised loathing. A camera operator was a necessity of the moment, perhaps, but although my work would aid their cause, and Jack never tired of playing to the imaginary audience I represented, I was not a true believer, so Abdul didn't bother to hide his feelings about me. Abdul and I started on the wrong foot right away, and things hadn't gotten any better between us. Nervously, during one of the group's pre-raid planning sessions, I innocently asked the guy where he was from, just looking to make conversation.
"Afghanistan,"
Abdul said flatly. "Oh, which part? A big city or someplace in the country?" Stupid. Even as the words left my mouth, I was embarrassed. What the hell did I know about Afghanistan? I couldn't find the place on the map if I had 3 days to search. And I sounded like a moron, even to myself. I remember very clearly how Abdul glared at me with unadulterated malice and said,
"I am from the part where dreams are strongly discouraged. Why do you think I am here?"
I didn't know what dreams Abdul might have, aside from his outspoken desire to destroy those who would commodify another living thing, even such a seemingly simplistic creature as a turkey. I knew the dude was a vegetarian, but his true motives most likely originated in childhood back in his harsh homeland, or maybe during his military training. Somebody told me he had earned his citizenship working with the U.S. soldiers as a translator in the Middle East. But honestly, I didn't really care about any of that. And I wasn't overly concerned with whatever ultimate prize our fearless leader Jack wanted out of this dangerous and illegal endeavor either, except that it seemed to make Shayna happy to offer the douchebag my services as a mission documentarian. Shayna, though, was another story altogether. I was very interested in everything about her. The gorgeous biology major entered my life almost by accident, when we'd been paired to give a presentation together in our history class. I was instantly in love, but Shayna was indifferent to even my most charming attempts at conversation and brushed off multiple invitations to go have coffee or see a movie. Tagging along to a meeting of the animal rights group to which she belonged and spoke about often, founded by this guy named Jack, about whom she also spoke very often, seemed to endear me to her, albeit mildly. And when she asked for my help with the Shrike raid, I tried not to agree too quickly, later saving face with myself by reasoning that I had, in fact, needed a subject for my next student film anyway. Secretly, I hoped my participation might elevate me somehow in Shayna's mind. But the mood tonight was much more serious than I expected. It was getting more serious all the time, and she had barely glanced at me yet. I tried once again to catch Shayna's eye, but Jack was already heading toward our ultimate target without looking back, and she was as ever hot on his heels. Abdul paused just long enough to jab a finger into my chest.
You are feeling better now, yes?
Yeah, I muttered, turning to follow. I feel fantastic. The main door of Coop 3 was daunting. A thick metal slab fortified with several intimidating padlocks and one digital keypad, but Abdul apparently entertained even less regard for American security than he did for yours truly. The dour Arab quickly set about dismantling Shrike's fortifications with ease, using nothing more than a pair of slim silver tools taken from the pack tied around his waist. I thought I saw something else in there. A tightly wrapped bundle of what dozens of movies and TV shows told me was dynamite. But I told myself that couldn't be right. Explosives weren't part of the plan. In the time it took me to convince myself that my eyes were wrong and frame the shot, the locks were on the ground, the keypad was dark, and Abdul was swinging open the heavy door.
This country.
He slowly shook his head.
How is it you people controlled so much of the world for so many years?
Stepping forward into the blackness, Jack paused, turned, and found the camera lens. With an obviously practiced grin that perfectly showed off his straight white teeth, he said,
Balls, my friend. That's how.
I could almost hear my eyes roll. Inside the coop, I could feel the size of the space, smell the dank soft earth beneath our shoes, the ripe and meaty stink of the birds. It was hot and moist like a greenhouse, and I instantly began to sweat. I heard the animals moving somewhere out of sight and panned the camera. But even using night vision, I was unable to pick out more than vague shapes. The rest of the team's flashlights impotently prodded the dark, revealing only the tiniest pieces of the room and not one glimpse of our quarry.
Keep filming,
Jack said.
There's supposed to be a bank of controls off to the left here, and a light switch.
Loud flapping, as if a dozen turkeys suddenly attempted and failed to fly in unison, exploded from somewhere off to my right, and I jumped, nearly dropping the camera. A series of sharp chirp-like calls sounded, and were seemingly answered by the other birds on the opposite side of the coop.
Stop scaring the birds!
Jack paused his search long enough to turn the flashlight accusingly onto me. I'm scaring them? Where the hell is that light switch?
Be quiet,
Shayna whispered.
I hear something.
Jack said,
That's your boyfriend Ken Burns over there pissing his pants.
I mean it,
Shayna insisted.
There's something big moving around.
She directed her light toward an unseen source of rustling.
Found it,
Jack said.
Let there be light.
With a clunk and hum, long strips of caged tubes running along the ceiling blazed to crimson life, bathing the room in a hellish glow, momentarily blinding us, but not before I caught a fleeting glimpse of the creatures. It was deceptive at first because they were moving, but I quickly realized the young birds slowly surrounding us were very tall, heads rising nearly to my chest, and they were really fat. Great rolls of flesh piled atop two shaky legs that were mostly useless blubber jiggled above their small clawed feet. Worst of all was their feathers. They didn't have any. What good are feathers to men obsessed with meat? An unfortunate extra step in the creature's processing that last removed thanks to scientific refinement. The flesh of the birds was slick with clear viscous perspiration that stank of garlic and rancid butter. They were the bloodless pallor of things that spend their lives wiggling under rocks or squirming across the ocean floor. The complexion of life that exists wholly out of view of the sun.
Oh my God,
Shayna gasped.
what have they done?
Jack was at my shoulder reeking of Axe body spray and whispering excitedly.
Are you getting this?
I could only nod, mouth agape, panning quickly across the circle of young turkeys. In some small part of my brain well removed from the moment, I began formulating my Academy Award acceptance speech, imagining what color Shayna's gown might be. The birds, dimly I recalled from the team's research that a baby turkey was called a poult, not a chick, toddled closer in short bursts of eager mincing steps before collapsing under their own top-heavy weight. Enormous breasts, meaty sacks like some hormonal teenage boy's favorite obscene cartoon, hung from their chests. Their eyes, vacant milky pools covered by thin layers of nearly translucent wrinkled skin, seemed somehow to both regard and simultaneously ignore us. They opened their colorless beaks as if tasting the air. Purplish worm tongues flopped and twitched within. Shayna jabbed her flashlight at the poult closest to her, but the beast did not flinch.
I think they're blind,
She said,
their eyes. If they're raised in darkness, they don't need eyes.
First one bird, then another, as if in response, opened their albino beaks and let loose a fresh chorus of the strange squawking calls. After each round, the birds all twitched their heads from side to side. With each session of the call and response, the nightmarish flock drew closer, inquisitively tightening their ranks around us. The strange new arrivals in their lightless world.
It's some kind of sonar,
Shayna said.
like what bats use, I think. Everybody huddle together. We'll look bigger to them.
Abdul screamed. One young turkey somehow snuck around behind him and got close enough to snap its beak closed on his arm. He wrenched free, blood pouring from the wound, and drew from his boot a long hunting knife. Smelling the blood, the other poults began to squawk more excitedly, madly flapping their pudgy featherless wings and wobbling from foot to foot. It was like their bodies had been inflated from within, I thought, pushed by chemicals and supplements to expand beyond anything nature would require. The noise quickly became unbearable in the echo and cavernous space.
Got it,
I shouted.
let's go. I have enough.
No!
Jack said.
We need a specimen!
What? That was not the plan.
Shayna said, swinging her flashlight back and forth in an attempt to keep the birds at bay.
Forget the plan.
Jack marched toward the nearing flock.
Nobody will believe the video by itself. They'll say it's some kind of stupid YouTube hoax. We're taking one of these birds with us. They can't ignore that.
The poult that bid Abdul was following him step for step as he retreated toward the open door, pecking at the drops of blood which fell to the dirt. Cradling the injured arm against his chest, Abdul slashed with his knife, but the turkey was not deterred. Two of its siblings followed and quickly encircled Abdul, who was now alone, wounded, and separated from the group. Jack, too, had strayed off on his own into the midst of the featherless birds. He paused for a moment, but upon looking back and finding my camera lens dutifully fixed on him, as he had so often demanded, he quickly masked his doubt and resumed pursuit. His face a perfect imitation of Hollywood hero intensity, Jack reached out and grabbed hold of a bird, which immediately began squawking in a new higher pitch. Abdul shouted something in his own language and lunged, driving his knife into the poult nearest him. The blade sank with gruesome ease deep into the plump meat of its enormous breast, and the animal collapsed, flailing its fat wings and emitting a strained, painful wail. The other turkeys took up the call even as they set upon their wounded sibling. Beaks pierced the downed bird, tearing it open so they could scarf the still-living animal's guts. The escaping wave of stink further incited the group, who quickly advanced on Jack, head snaking out with unbelievable speed to remove his flesh in ragged patches. Each bite was tossed down a bird's throat with a swift jerk of their head before craning forward again to rip free another piece. Jack screamed and thrashed amidst a storm of ravenous mouths. All of this I filmed, petrified as a fossil. I couldn't have found the camera's power button if I'd wanted to. Not that I was eager to actually watch what was happening. My eyes strayed desperately beyond the carnage to the far corner of the coop and locked onto the flock's terrible matriarch. Without feathers or feet and completely eyeless, the enormous bird was a hulking mound of layered flesh rolls at least 7 feet tall. Wider than a wedding cake's frosting, its head topped a long snake-like neck, grazing the coop's ceiling, and gaping blisters freckled the monstrous bird, oozing more of the same pungent slime that coated its progeny. Self-basting, I thought, hearing a burst of deranged laughter at the realization, and understanding only afterward it came from my own mouth. Feeling oddly numb, I focused on checking audio levels and redirected the camera so as to capture the creature's approach rather than scream. If I started screaming, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop. The mother bird pulled itself forward with long mutant appendages that may have once been wings. At their tips, black claws grasped the dirt. The long wrinkled stalk of its neck strained forward, giant beak yawning open impossibly wide. And from the Stygian depths of its gullet erupted a resounding call that seemed to rattle the walls. Instantly, the poults abandoned their half-consumed sibling and retreated from what remained of Jack, scurrying to nuzzle their mother and cheep plaintively. Abdul was at the door shouting for retreat, but Shayna was running to kneel beside Jack.
I'm coming,
she cried.
Hold on.
His gurgling response might have been her name, but it was impossible to say for certain. Shayna grabbed hold of Jack, trying valiantly to drag him to safety, but the enormous mother turkey had closed the distance between them with horrible speed. It towered over Shayna, making inquisitive clucking and warbling sounds, twitching its massive head to and fro, inching closer with each call. I heard myself squeal as a hand fell heavily on my shoulder.
Now,
Abdul said.
We must leave.
He pulled me backward, still filming. I remember thinking that it was all for nothing if I didn't record what was happening. We moved toward the door as Shayna turned, far too late, and lunged, only to be caught around the leg mid-jump by the hen's giant beak. I heard the distant cracking of bones being crushed and Shayna screaming, but my eyes were already closed. Only the camera witnessed her demise. Then I was outside again, back in the cool nighttime air as Abdul slammed the door. Leaning against it, he gasped for breath, one arm dangling at his side, mutilated.
What about the others? I said. We have to do something, right? What happens next?
Abdul reached out with his good hand and tapped my camera.
That depends on you,
he said.
They die for a cause in which they profess belief. If you wish, you can make Jack famous, as he always desired to be. And the girl, she also got what she wanted. She had his attention at the end, finally.
I clutched my camera the way a drowning man holds tightly to anything that floats. My frazzled mind once again conjured a glitzy showbiz award ceremony. The low-cut dress of my date remained the same, although the part of its wearer needed to be recast. It was not a devastating revelation, and I smiled, turning the camera onto Abdul. "And you? What do you want?" From inside the building came a deafening squawk from the monster fowl. The crying of the Polts became more frantic as they pecked the door. From the pack tied around his waist, Abdul removed a small bundle of what definitely was dynamite and grinned.
I wish to mark my first Independence Day in this country with fireworks and roasted turkey.
I thought you were a vegetarian. Isn't that sort of thing against your religion? What's Allah going to say?
I think perhaps even God would make an exception here.
Abdul knocked lightly against the door, inciting a fresh round of cries from the birds inside.
And I never said I was going to eat them.
We managed to drag the guard, who had returned to bleary semi-consciousness, a safe distance away before the explosion lit up the night. Noise from the blast and the roar of hungry flames very nearly drowned out the anguished warbling of the dying monsters, the eerie sounds brought to us on the breeze as we rushed back across the field. Long and brightly, the conflagration burned, and the air smelled delicious.
He heats the silver blade of his pocket knife with the Zippo lighter he'd stolen from the gas station earlier that evening. The blade begins to blacken as the temperature of the steel begins to rise. Once the blade is fully blackened, he puts a hand towel in his mouth and bites down on it to brace himself for the pain. He then presses the blade firmly against the skin of his left forearm. Bobby knew this would hurt more than simply slicing his wrist with the knife, but it was too dull to break the skin, and he didn't feel like searching for another one amongst the unpacked boxes in his new house. Besides, a burn would take longer to heal, meaning he'd have the wound to pick at longer to satisfy his weird craving for blood. Through his own research, meaning a quick Google search while he got bored in the bathroom once, he learned that his habit was called hemophagia, or simply autovampirism, which was apparently a mental disorder. Some websites said it was linked to childhood trauma or done for some type of sexual gratification. He knew his reason was probably the former of the two. His childhood was filled with nothing but trauma, and he didn't get any sexual gratification from it. He didn't know the real reason. He'd done it as long as he could remember, or cared to remember. His body was covered in scars from his bloodletting. Truth be told, he just really liked the flavor of it. The flavor would even change depending on his diet for the week. His blood would be sweeter if he drank only Pepsi and ate sugary foods. If he drank some right after having coffee, he would swear that it gave him more energy than simply drinking the coffee did. Same for energy drinks. If he drank alcohol, well, let's just say his favorite alcoholic drink was his blood after having a handle or two of whiskey. When he first started, it was only a few drops here and there, maybe even a few licks when he accidentally scratched himself, and he'd just pick at the scab until it was fully healed or scarred. He didn't remember when he resorted to self-inflicted injuries, probably about the same time as when he started to grow up and get hurt less frequently, both physically and mentally. He just started to ponder his childhood trauma when he was interrupted by his girlfriend's voice. "What the fuck are you doing, Bobby? That one's going to get infected. I thought we were working on this," Sam shouted, her voice sounding more concerned than angry. "I'm sorry, babe. It's just with the move and all, I've been stressed. and you know the taste of the blood helps comfort me." He was lying, but she didn't know that. He had her convinced it was some type of a nervous habit he did when he was stressed out. "It's okay. I'll fetch my go bag and patch you up, but then I have to get ready for work. Are you going to be okay, unpacking alone while I'm gone?" "Oh, babe, do I have to? I just want to relax a little. It's been a long couple of days." "At least unpack your laptop and get back to work on your stories. I can't wait to read the next one." Her overexcitement for a story he had yet to write was encouraging. He couldn't help but feel lucky to have her. She loved his horror stories, and her being a full-time paramedic came in handy with the number of injuries he'd inflict upon himself. She walked away and came back with the black bag she always kept ready for just this type of situation. Helping save people was her full-time job, even at home, but she didn't mind. She enjoyed the feeling of being important to him and the rush she got from saving people. The only grievance he had with her was the fact that she was trying to fix him when he didn't feel like his habit was that bad. There were worse habits. For example, he could have been smoking or drinking himself to death. All this left him with were scars. "You could work on the next chapter of your novel," she said, while dropping the bag on the ground next to him. "Yeah, I don't know. I think I might scrap it. The whole premise just feels a bit childish." "Childish? There's nothing childish about the chapter where the closeted bully bashes his homophobic alcoholic father's brains in and then lights their house on fire. Besides, I need to know how it ends." He laughed as she wrapped up his burn. Her constant encouragement was the only reason he hadn't given up on being an author, and why he had published his first collection of stories in the first place. Hell, if not for her making him publish them, they probably wouldn't have been able to afford their new house, and he probably wouldn't even be alive. She became a paramedic partially because of him. They had met in high school, and she had been patching him up ever since. Though he thought she was smart enough to be a doctor, she decided she liked the rush of being an emergency responder and having an ever-changing work environment. Sam finished patching him up and kissed him before leaving for work. He was now alone with his thoughts in unfamiliar territory for the first time since high school. He decided to take Sam's advice and try and find his laptop so he could work on another horror story. He opened the boxes labeled "Office" and was digging around in them when the craving for his blood began to kick in. He found his letter opener in one of the boxes and took it into the bathroom with him. He stripped off his clothes and looked at himself in the mirror, looking at all the scars he'd acquired over the 25 years of his life. He unwrapped the latest wound to add to the collection. He examined the burn. It looked like he had burned straight to the muscle tissue. He planned on digging the letter opener into it to make it bleed, but he decided he didn't want to bear that much pain twice on the same day. Besides, the letter opener's 2-inch blade was sharp enough to slice his skin with barely any pressure or effort. What's one more scar amongst the countless ones he already had? He plugged the bathtub drain and started to let it fill with water as he attempted to relax. He played with the letter opener, examining its every detail. Sam had bought it for him as a reward for publishing his first book. It was pure silver, and she had had it engraved in cursive with the words, "For opening your future fan mail." It always made him smile when he read it. He hadn't received any fan mail yet. At least not that he knew about, because he hadn't checked the P.O. box he had opened for that since he published the book. He was too scared it would turn out to be hate mail instead. The fear of people hating his work kept him from publishing it in the first place. He started to remember the harsh criticisms his abusive stepfather had given him back when he was a teenager and had found Bobby's old notebook filled with the stories he had just published. He could remember that day very vividly. It was the first time anyone else had ever read any of his horror stories. His stepfather, an author of mostly Christian and religious literature, never thought it took much talent to write horror stories. He made his disgust of the genre well known when he burned Bobby's collection of R.L. Stine's Goosebumps books and whipped him for reading Stephen King novels when he got older. He even despised horror movies. He'd always go on rants about how anyone associated with the genre was a Satanist or a cultist. Every time a new horror movie premiered, he'd petition the church to ban it from the local cinema to, quote, protect the community from satanic imagery, unquote. So, when he discovered that Bobby was avidly writing horror stories, he damn near killed him. Bobby began to picture that night in his head. "What the fuck is this garbage?" his stepfather shouted. "It's my..." Bobby's response was cut short by the notebook being thrown into his face, knocking him to the floor and giving him a bloody nose. "You untalented heathen! These stories are abominations!" His mother ran in to see the commotion and screamed in horror at seeing her son with a bloody nose on the floor. "What the fuck did you do to my son?" His mother's anger had taken them both by surprise. She had never come to her son's defense before. "I'm teaching this godless, no-talent heathen what happens when you worship Satan in my house," he replied while taking off his belt. He beat Bobby half into a coma that night. When his mother tried to stop the beating, he knocked her out with one quick strike and continued the brutal onslaught of beating a defenseless preteen. Every hit came with its own insult. His stepfather's insults continued to fill his mind as he pressed the blade of the letter opener to his wrist. He closed his eyes and began to apply pressure. The words kept echoing in his mind as new voices joined in with new insults. Tears began to form in Bobby's eyes as he slid the knife across his wrist, not realizing he had accidentally applied too much pressure until it was too late. Blood began pouring out of the fresh cut faster than he had intended. The water began to turn red as the blood trickled down his wrist and into the tub. "Shit, shit, shit!" he shouted while trying to reach for his phone. He dropped his phone into the dark red water, his wet hands letting it slip out of his grip like a bar of soap. "Fuck!" In a panic, he quickly jumped out of the tub, turning the white and blue floor tiles red as the mixture of blood and water splashed. Sprinting to the living room to try and find the house phone, he remembered that they hadn't even set up home phone service yet. He sprinted back to the bathtub and tried to find his phone in the dark red water as the blood flowed out of his wrist, dripping off his arm and beginning to pool beneath him on the floor. His vision blurred as he finally felt his fingers brushing his phone. He managed to grab his phone before falling over onto his side. Squeezing his phone, he tried to activate its emergency SOS feature, but wasn't sure if the phone was even working as his vision faded to black. Unsure of how much time he had been unconscious, or if the whole situation had just been a bad dream, he woke up in a hospital bed with his wrists restrained. "Bobby, oh thank God you're finally awake!" He heard Sam's voice shout excitedly from his left. What happened? Where am I?" he replied in a dazed, confused state. "You're in the hospital, baby. You cut too deep. The doctors say you almost reached the bone. That's why I told you not to do it without me present." Her voice was stern, but didn't hide her concern. A guilty feeling began to rush into Bobby as he could hear the disappointment and fear in her voice. He looked into her bloodshot hazel eyes and saw that she had been crying. I know I fucked up, and I'm sorry. You know me, I'm usually more careful. I just got lost in my head. You don't know how scared I was. My first call of the day was to my own home, and I found my boyfriend lying on the bathroom floor naked, not only in a pool of his own blood, but next to a bathtub full of blood. You're lucky Apple gave iPhones the emergency SOS feature. I lost that much blood? He asked. Yeah, I had to give you some of mine during transport to keep you alive. Then, at the hospital, they had to give you even more. Also, my partner saw you naked. All he can talk about is the size of your... It's whatever. At least he isn't talking about all the scars or the situation. Well, he wouldn't be the first gay guy that's jealous you have me. She laughed. Yeah, he keeps jokingly asking if you'll be up for a threesome with him and his husband when you recover. And I'm pretty sure he might have taken a picture. They both laugh. Anyway, baby, we need to talk. From her voice, he could tell she had bad news. They wanted you to stay here under suicide watch and be admitted to the psych ward. I tried to convince them you aren't suicidal or a danger to others, but that was a little hard considering all the scars you have from self-inflicted injuries. Damn, and here I was thinking I could go home and write a story about this. I'll bring you your laptop and other necessities, and I'll visit every day till you can come home. The next few weeks were tough for Bobby. He was under constant watch, and the doctors and nurses checked him every night for new wounds. The therapists tried to make him talk about his childhood and any other issues, but he would either avoid the subject or make up stories about how good it was. By week 2, he began to get easily agitated and started showing some withdrawal symptoms that he tried his best to cover up so the doctors and Sam wouldn't notice. His skin was pale, and he began to look like he wasn't eating. The cravings were hitting him like an annoying itch he couldn't scratch. He needed his fix like a junkie needed meth. He had 2 wounds on his arm he could just simply open and drink the blood from easily, but they wouldn't let him even look at them most of the time, forcing him to wear long sleeves and cover them in the shower. Their thought was, out of sight, out of mind. But that wasn't working for him. He wished he could go back in time just to taste the blood from the cut. He could have consumed the gallons of blood that went to waste on the floor or down the drain. By the start of week 3, he was trying to bite his tongue until it bled, but he could never bite down hard enough or long enough without the nurses or doctors noticing. He was being driven to his limits, and Sam was the only one who knew him well enough to notice. She told him to focus on his stories, and it would take his mind off it, but writing a bloody horror story where someone else got to satiate their cravings wasn't appealing. When Sam came to visit on the Wednesday of week 3, she acted differently than normal. "What's wrong, Sammy?" Bobby asked. Before answering, she carefully looked around the visitor center. "Nothing, baby. Well, spit it out," Bobby snapped, drawing the room's attention for a moment. "Keep it down, Bobby, or I won't be able to give this to you." "Give me what?" Before answering, he felt Sam pass him something under the table. Looking down, he saw a manila envelope that he quickly stuffed into his pants pocket. "Don't open it yet until you're alone," she whispered. "Okay, but what is it?" "You'll see, baby. I volunteered to be on standby for the high school hockey game, but I have to go back to work tonight. I love you, and I miss you." Before he could say it back, she had already given him a long kiss and hug goodbye and walked away as if she was scared she'd get in trouble. It would be a long couple of hours for Bobby as the contents of the manila envelope dwelled on his mind. What could she be so nervous about that she didn't even wait for me to say I loved her back? He thought out loud. "What was that?" the nurse asked while walking in. "I asked if it was shower time," he replied quickly. Yes, it is. I'll replace your bandages and cover them up for you. Then you're good to go. The nurse seemed to take her time rebandaging his wounds, and Bobby was trying not to get visibly impatient with her. Of course, he'd get the new nurse without warning on the day he had something to open in the bathroom. It's like whatever god there was playing a practical joke on him he didn't have the patience for. When she was finally done, Bobby practically leapt off the hospital bed into the bathroom. He quickly opened the manila envelope he had in his pocket all day, and a letter dropped out, along with a liter of blood in one of those hospital drip bags. He picked up the note and began to read. Dear Bobby, these past few weeks without you at home have been painful and lonely. I miss you so much. Watching you suffer in that hospital has been hard for me. I've tried convincing the doctors to let you come home and that all you need is me, but they say your erratic behavior points to some type of withdrawal. I now understand why you do what you do more than ever. So don't ask me how, but I got this for you. Don't worry, it's my blood, so it is clean. Just try to pace yourself so you can get out of this hospital prison and back home with me, where you belong. Love, Sam. Bobby kissed the note as if he were kissing Sam to thank her. He quickly bit into the bag of blood like a predator that had just caught its first prey in weeks. He tried to pace himself, at first, but once the first drop hit his tongue, he couldn't help himself. As he drank more, he began to notice the difference in the flavor of her blood compared to his. Hers tasted far superior to his. The difference was like Pepsi compared to bargain brand cola. He assumed it must have been from her mostly healthy diet and active lifestyle. Before he could enjoy the taste anymore, the blood bag was little more than empty. He tried his hardest to get the last bit out, to no avail. Suddenly, the nurse knocked on the door. He looked at himself in the mirror and noticed the color of his skin had begun to come back. He also noticed his teeth and lips were red with blood. Are you okay in there? She asked. Yeah, I just had to take a dump first, he replied. After a quick shower and a quick check for any new wounds or evidence of an attempt at self-harm, the nurse left him alone so he could try and fall asleep. He couldn't, however. He now couldn't get his mind off how perfect her blood had tasted. He knew she was perfect, but not that perfect. The next day when Sam came to visit, her eyes lit up with excitement when she noticed how much better he looked after one night. I can't believe that worked. You look so much better than you have in these past few weeks. The doctor said the nurses have been telling him how well you've been doing today, and that if you keep this up, you can be home by Sunday. Her voice was as excited as her eyes were. Yeah, thank you, baby. I know this must have been hard on you, and I've missed you more than anything, even the blood. She blushed. Out of curiosity, how did it taste? She asked. As perfect as you, my love. Blushing even more, she responded with another question. Do you think that'll get you through till Sunday? You drank the whole bag, didn't you? She asked, slightly annoyed. You know me so well. That was supposed to be a 4-day supply, you jackass. She sighed. You're lucky I love you. I'll try to get you another bag before visiting hours end. No, you don't. I want you home, alive, and I want you healthy. If this is what it takes, then so be it. Only an hour would pass before she returned with a fresh bag of blood in hand for another visit. Only this time she was less nervous about smuggling it in. She passed it to Bobby underneath the table, and he shoved it into his pants pocket just like last time. Thank you, baby. Don't thank me. Thank the hospital for lax security around the blood bank. I was able to walk in and out, no problem, she said confidently. Aw, you robbed a bank for me? Bobby responded jokingly. Yeah, so just be careful, okay? That may be clean blood, but it's from some random person. Later that night, when it was time for a shower, he took out the new manila envelope that was hiding the blood bag and opened it. This time, he was a bit more hesitant. Was he really resorting to drinking some stranger's blood? He thought to himself. He looked in the mirror and began to ponder if other people's blood tasted better than his own, or if he had just been that blood-starved. There was only one way to find out: to taste the blood in the bag Sam had given him. Cautiously, he bit a small hole into it, only big enough to let out a few drops at a time. He then slowly pressed his tongue to the new blood like a child trying new food. Once the taste hit his tongue, he immediately bit down on the bag, accidentally spraying some on the floor. He impulsively and quickly began to drink the whole bag. Once it was gone, he started to lick the blood off the floor. "Oh my God!" the nurse screamed. She had entered the bathroom to check on him and found him with human blood dripping down the sides of his mouth. She tried to turn and run out of the room, but tripped over her own feet. She hit her head on his bed, knocking herself unconscious and causing herself to bleed. As if instincts took over, Bobby impulsively ran over to her body and began dipping his hands into her blood and licking it off his fingers. He then began to wonder what blood would taste like directly from the tap. The nurse had just begun to awaken when Bobby forced a pen into her jugular and began consuming the blood that poured out. She tried to fight him, but he was too strong. She tried to scream, but he had already taken the pen and shoved it into her vocal cords. She was absolutely powerless to stop him. He knew this was wrong, but he couldn't stop himself. The blood tasted too good. He began to hear voices outside the door, and he panicked. There was now a dead body in his room, and he was covered in its delicious blood. In his head, he estimated he probably just consumed about 3 gallons of blood, maybe more. However, it wasn't enough. He wanted more. Not only that, he wanted more straight from the tap. He grabbed the pen and hid it on the hinge side of the door, ready to attack the next nurse or doctor to walk in the room. The door opened, and he heard a scream, followed by the doctor quickly calling for help as he got down to check on the nurse. This attack had to be quick. Bobby pounced on the doctor and quickly stabbed him in the jugular twice and began consuming his blood. This male doctor seemed as powerless to stop him as the nurse had been. With the blood not flowing out fast enough, Bobby bit down as hard as he could, ripping the doctor's throat open even more. Doctors and nurses began to rush to the room, to the chaotic scene, and were powerless to stop him. Bobby slaughtered and drank the blood of anyone that crossed his path. He felt like an invincible god. Alarms started blaring as patients and doctors tried to flee the psych ward. The under-equipped and under-trained security guards tried to stop him, to no avail. Blood began to decorate the walls and floors of the hospital halls. It wasn't until the first cop shot at him that Bobby finally halted his onslaught, taking cover around a corner. "Look, man, I don't know what you're on or what you're not on, but I know you are a danger. and I can't let you leave this hospital or this psych ward alive unless you surrender," the officer called out. Bobby looked around at the mess of blood and bodies he had left in his path to the exit. It looked like a scene out of one of his horror stories. How did his weird habit result in this? "All right, to get out, I clearly have to go through you, but you have a gun. I would rather not die, so I guess I surrender. I'll come out with my hands up and back turned to you. Please don't shoot me." He complied with the officer's demands and stepped out of the corner with his hands up and his back turned. He listened to the footsteps as the police officer approached him. "All right now, I'm going to cuff you. Now to do that, I have to holster my pistol. If you try anything, I will be forced to use lethal force on you." Bobby silently nodded his head. The officer was clearly a rookie, so he just had to wait for the right moment to strike. He listened closely as the officer lowered his gun to place it into the holster to cuff him. When Bobby heard the pistol click into place, he quickly spun and grabbed the officer's arm away from his hip and ripped his throat open with his teeth, biting directly into his jugular. Bobby began to hear the voices of more officers approaching on foot, and the tires screeching of even more arriving in cars with lights and sirens blaring. He began to flee down the stairwell. He didn't care about where he was going to hide or how he'd get anywhere. All he cared about was where he'd get his next fix. Hours had now passed since the hospital, and there was a town-wide search for the person responsible. No one had pieced together what had happened yet. Bobby had managed to escape by following other surviving patients and doctors covered in blood. No one had seemed to notice that he was covered the most. They must have been too petrified. He managed to find his way safely to his backyard without anyone knowing. He picked up the key under a fake rock he had placed rather stupidly on the back porch where there were no other rocks. He knew it was kinda dumb to put it there, but he figured the last place anyone would look for a fake rock hiding a key was the single rock on the porch by the door. He hadn't even gotten the door open when he heard her voice. "Bobby, is that you?" Her voice sounded worried and scared. Bobby didn't reply. He didn't know what to say. He had hoped she wouldn't have been home and that she'd still be at the hospital working, allowing him some time to get some clothes and leave without a trace, and that she'd assume he was just another victim. She approached the back door and pulled it open. Her face turned white as she saw her boyfriend covered head to toe in human blood, standing in front of her. She was frozen in fear. She had seen a lot being a paramedic, but it wasn't what she was seeing that she was afraid of. It was the immediate realization of what had happened at the hospital and how Bobby was behind it. Bobby began to tear up. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want you to see me as this monster I've become." He collapsed into her as he started to sob, smearing blood all over her clothes and skin. She wrapped her arms around him. "I'm sorry, baby. I came home as soon as I couldn't find you at the hospital. I figured you'd come here." Her voice shook. "This is your fault. If you hadn't given me that blood, we'd still be fine. I would have never known how good other people's blood can taste," Bobby yelled. "You just had to go and be impatient." Sam, fearing for her life, pushed Bobby away and ran into the house, trying to close the door behind her. Bobby quickly recovered from her shove and wedged himself between the door and the doorway, forcing his way in and knocking Sam to the floor. "Please, Bobby, you don't have to do this. You love me. Remember you love me," She screamed frantically. "I love your blood!" Bobby tried pouncing on her, but she rolled out of the way and sprinted towards the bathroom. He pursued her, but she managed to get the door shut and locked this time before he could get to her. Bobby banged on the door as hard as possible to attempt to force it open, while Sam screamed and pleaded for him to stop. She looked around for anything to defend herself, and underneath the bathtub, she spotted the silver letter opener she had bought him to reward him for publishing his first book. Bobby was just about to enter the door as she dove for the knife. The door flew open and Bobby pounced on her again. This time he wouldn't miss, but neither would she. The silver blade of the letter opener plunged straight into Bobby's heart. He felt the cold burn of the silver puncture his heart as he rolled out from on top of her. He began to hear sirens and the screeching of tires. His vision began to fade to black as blood pooled beneath him, turning the white and blue floor tiles red once again. The last thing he saw was Sam's terrified, heartbroken face. "I'm sorry, my love."
Prologue. Joey slowly opened her eyes. Tingles of numbing sensations prickled throughout her body. Not being able to focus on any one thought, she attempted to squint through the foggy, blurred vision at what she could make out. The color green was predominant, along with hues of blue, brown, and dark black. She lay still as her head pounded with each pulse of unrelenting, throbbing aches. Joey struggled, unable to remember or recognize any of the surroundings she now felt encased. Not the smells, the sounds, not anything. Everything appeared and felt entirely unfamiliar. Suddenly, the crippling pain washed across her body in a crashing wave. It started in her legs, then oddly moved calmly past her torso, but again raged throughout both arms. Shackled with sharp attacks of gripping stings, Joey was paralyzed, lacking the mobility to move her body much at all. Wave after wave of shock rolled through her mind and body as she attempted to cry out. It was as if she were being stretched and pulled by the wooden horse, an ancient Roman rack used to torture prisoners by stretching them until their joints would dislocate. Without warning, Joey's ears became keenly aware to a strange whirring sound. She wasn't sure where the odd-pitched noise came from, but it pierced through her agonizing pain, giving her sudden focus. She tried calming herself, talking aloud as if it would help her frightened state of mind to slow her quick breathing. The high-pitched squeal lulled her concentration away from everything else except the tone. It was fading, slowly morphing into a slowing but rhythmic string of clicks. A pattern with cadence became weaker and slower. She knew she was going to go black any minute. And then, she was out. The wheel mounted between the bent front forks of the Harley FLH slowly wound down, momentum losing its battle to keep spinning as the bike lay in a crumpled mass of metal and splintered wood. The steel skeleton mortally wounded near the tree it had just made fatal contact with. A large owl with a massive wingspan had just dropped from a limb overhanging the highway, flying into Travis's neck and shoulder as he and Joey leaned tightly into the hairpin corner. The bird's contact forced Travis to veer onto the shoulder, making his Harley's tires skid out of control in the loose gravel before hitting the unavoidable hole in the asphalt. The sudden slime jar caused the bike to shoot off the highway, becoming airborne into the tree-lined forest that made the road such a beautiful ride. Both Travis and Joey were thrown after careening into the tree trunk some 20 feet down the embankment from the road's edge. The large, dark-winged fowl was now twisted into the metal mess. Blood, goo, and feathers now smeared all over the chrome and crumpled black shiny painted pride and joy. Joey lay unconscious several feet to the right from where she was thrown. The motorcycle, just behind her body, which lay somewhat hidden in the grass and brush. Her fiancé Travis's limp body lay decapitated, his head having been rolled several feet away and now rested against a brown boulder. Travis's oddly perched face lay bloody and battered, his eyes frozen open in a blank hollowness while his stare gazed back as if he were looking into the world from another dimension. Thick, long black hair on the now detached skull was covered with dirt and pine needles, making it an odd, eclectic mix of things melded together that don't belong as one. An eerie sight that would certainly haunt anyone upon walking up and witnessing the macabre scene. His body lay several feet back, twisted into a form no human should ever be found. He had obviously died instantly, most likely never realizing what happened. The twisty mountain road was not usually well traveled, but fortunately for Joey, who still lay broken but alive, an old man in a pickup truck not far behind them witnessed the entire accident. He immediately dialed 911. Help arrived just in time to save the young blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from bleeding out. She had sustained massive fractures and contusions, leading her to code 3 times before the ambulance arrived at the Redwood Memorial Hospital emergency room, southwest of San Jose in Santa Cruz. Joey would live, but her real battle now lies ahead. A long and continuous war of overcoming and conquering the hidden enemy lying within, patiently in wait, to live again and hunt. Chapter 1. Joey, 4 years after the accident. Life was no longer easy. I often wondered what I'd done to piss off the big man upstairs. I'd suffered through 11 surgeries in just over 4 years since the late afternoon ride that not only stole my lover and future, but was still trying to steal my desire to live through recovery. The very word, recovery, makes me laugh. Does one ever really recover from a fucking life-stealing event like the one I was given? I still had more surgeries to go through. The only thing I now looked forward to was the measured pain of receiving new inked artwork that aided in covering the ugly memories of surgical markings left deep in my body from the surgeons. At least the pain of being tattooed was something I held control over. I got to choose when, where, and what was to be stippled into my skin instead of some surgeon's knife leaving a trail of tissue unnaturally sewn back together. Yes, I held resentment. My life had been going perfect. I was gorgeous and had a great guy who loved and cared for me. Great rides together all over California and Oregon, wherever we damn well wanted to go. Travis held a great job which afforded us to do anything we wanted. And then one goddamned western screech owl protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and my life and future vanished, gone in an instant. And to think I love nature, birds, reptiles, and I love everything natural. But no longer any fucking owls. Those goddamn creatures can burn in hell. I am alive, though, and I'm strong-willed. I'm no fucking quitter. I survived for a reason. Travis, I miss you, babe. You were a good man. And I will see you again and ride that ride together forever. I thought to myself as I lifted my highball glass of Jameson on the rocks to the framed picture of the two of us on his scooter named Blackie. A tinge of pain began in the crook of my neck and shot down my arm. It was as if the devil were needling me of what he had stolen away, but no broken neck or spine injuries could stop me now. Recovery? Fuck it. I'm on a mission now. No need to be upset at the guys at work for calling me a cyborg. I've been recreated and tweaked for a purpose. I just needed to find out what that purpose is. After dialing Royal Ink, I asked for Matt, my tattooist. Hey Matty, what's up? Yeah, I think my scar can handle it now. You know I need the ink pain for therapy, right? I smiled as he chuckled. You've already done about 60% of my body and I've never so much as flinched or cried like a little bitch yet. You know I can handle it. Okay, next Friday it is. See you then, sweetheart. I pulled my tank top up, revealing yet another surgical scar. I looked at Matt as he studied the long, rough patchwork on my side. Damn, Joey. Matt ran his fingers over the spot of the latest incision. I think you're in for some real therapeutic, discomfort here. Ribs are a bit touchy. I know you're one tough ninja warrior, but if this sketch of your quote is what you are wanting, what doesn't kill me only makes me stronger, he continued to lightly trail his fingers back and forth over the long scar tissue. This one may make it difficult for you to prove that tough ninja shit. All solid dark blacks and grays, huh? You are either very brave or very self-penitent. Give me your darkest ink, Maddie. No quote ever fit truer with me than this one, sweetie. You are a different brand of woman, Joey. Your daddy named you right, Miss Tommy Boy. Mac grinned an evil grin. Damn straight, Maddie. You can't be a girly girl when your daddy names you Joey, kind of like Johnny Cash and a boy named Sue. How do you do? Now, you're gonna die. Joey smiled a huge grin before the two busted into laughter. I knew Matt shouldn't have been amazed when I sat through the 6-hour session without batting an eye or squeezing back a tear. He knew I was one tough cookie, and I knew he appreciated that. Crying, puking girly girls were not exactly welcome in his shop. That's why the sign over his chair boldly read, "Hike up your big girl undies and shut the fuck up." I stood in front of the mirror admiring yet another addition to the visual story of my journey. Yep, part of the recovery process. I knew my daddy was looking down on me with a smile of self-pride. After all, he had made me who I was, and this world wasn't even close to tough enough to break me. Not today, not tomorrow, never. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Chapter 2. Dreams and Aberration. Waking up and sensing it was still dark outside, I felt an awkward feeling of a stalking nature. Not as if I were the one being hunted, but the tension and anxiety of being the lurker or shadow in the darkness. One part of me felt ashamed or contrite for this odd feeling, yet on the flip side, I felt pride in my stealth and awareness of my prey. My heart was racing. I could feel the pulse in my fingertips. I felt power. I found this sensation exhilarating, yet very awkward and uncomfortable for some reason. Who or what had I been stalking? In my dream, I'd felt myself breathing in mechanical rhythms as if my body were growling a low, inaudible purr of anticipated exhilaration. I was like an animal with the hunger for another's lifeblood, inquisitive of the urge to kill, not out of any need or self-preservation, but for one of pleasure and discovery. I laid as still as a deer, much like my eyesight locked into the headlights of a vehicle careening at me in a high rate of speed. I've never felt this way before. Never. Nary a flinch from a muscle. For the first time in my life, through all the hardship and tragedy I've endured, I feel something inside I've never experienced before. True fear. I felt its danger. I felt dangerous. Granted, it is mixed with an overwhelming taste of intense excitement, but fear is a definite strain within this new emotion I had never dealt with. My senses homed in. I heard things clearer with focus, and my visual sight held more definition. I was like a cat. Not some lazy fat house cat, but a leopard or panther. A sensation of being predatorial. I could smell a cologne I'd not recognized. It wasn't eternity. That was Travis's signature scent that always heightened my sexual desires. This aroma was something more arrogant. It was almost assaulting in the way it infiltrated my nostrils. It was pissing me the fuck off, filling me with an agitated anger not present mere seconds ago. My eyes sharpened, and the dark silhouette that moments earlier was hidden in the shadows now stood out as if I were wearing military-grade night vision goggles. This figure now cleared into a legible face. He was a handsome young man. I don't know why or what made that thought pop into my mind, but it did, and I couldn't tuck it back into the recess of the drawer inside my mind. The sentence rolled across my mental tongue as clear as glass. It's too bad I must stab the life out of such a cute young college boy. And mentally, that is exactly what I did. Of course, I played with the internal picture of the act inside my brain like a cat would toy with a helpless trapped rodent. He was easily lured into a false sense of security by my hot, moist, and fleshy body. I almost felt bad he never saw it coming. He was so anxious to get me naked and romp, he never optioned in his young mind that a female such as me could be a dangerous and fatal threat. A Trojan horse hiding within a woman that harbored needs of stealing life from a man. Not his possessions, but his life itself. The act of doing so had been beautiful, but hideous all at once. The bed, now splattered with collecting pools of the crimson-red liquid that moments earlier sustained Josh's life, now left his eyes silently stilled to an uncontrolled quiver as life slipped from his body. He hadn't owned enough time to show a look of fright. Just as his face shined full of the pleasure that I was giving him, my fingers reached for the blade stashed in the sheets wadded up behind me. I went crazy, energetic, and wild as I slashed at him with the steel-serrated blade. The thump of the bass from the song blasting from his stereo charged me with the rhythm I stabbed at his heart. The act felt like I imagined a famous painter would enjoy as he wielded his painter's brush, bristles full of the bright red paint as it sliced through the air, artistically filling the white canvas with broad strokes of his blood-red anguish. When my painting was finished, I collapsed, void of all the energy seconds earlier controlled me. Now completely spent, breathing heavily and working at comprehending what I had just done. I moved in close and looked into his open eyes as they stared back empty but wide open for me to inspect. Void of life, yet a tiny gleam of the hallway sconce's light reflecting brightly in his now dark and dead pupils. Fuck! What had I done? Confused, my lips, which formed a straight line of shock and question, suddenly turned up into a Cheshire cat's grin. I lifted my aching arched back from the bent-over position I'd been sitting on him in. I took a moment to admire my first work of art, smearing the fresh blood against my thighs and palms. As I leaned forward, his manhood fell away from me, and I took note of the awareness. A fucking masterpiece. I knew instantly I would have to paint again. A new thirst that could only be quenched by replication leading to perfection. I climbed off my victim's now flaccid, moist body and rolled over onto my back. I attempted to relive the moment as if I could hit rewind on a VCR and then push play, but instead my eyes slid up under my eyelids, too empty to complete the thought. I laid still like that deer in headlights beside the cooling body I'd just ravaged and then stolen its life without hesitation nor reason. I quietly fell into the deepest and pain-free sleep I'd enjoyed in a long, long time. Recovery was coming along grandly. Chapter 3. Waking Up Emotions of Consequence. My bedroom window was positioned where the rising sun filled its glass pane every morning. The curtains were light and airy enough to quell the harshness of its brightest beams without entirely blocking the early rays allowed in to wake me with casual brightening light. After all, I held no real schedule anymore. The surgeries and recovery times now robbed me of my job. Thankfully, my father had not only raised me to be strong and fit to care for myself, but he had also left a gracious life insurance payoff. My schedule was now reduced to recouping from one surgery until the next, tattoo therapy from my artist Maddie in between, and being hospitable to those in the neighborhood who were less fortunate than I. Watching crime TV at any hour I wanted was almost always on my schedule of killing time. Killing time. I laughed at my thought and use of the phrase. I brushed the night crust from my eyes and rolled over to my side, expecting to see Josh's cold, stiff body lying beside me. No panic within, just realizing in the moment that I had made no plan of how to dispose of his body. I looked over with slight hesitation. My mouth suddenly fell open without refrain. Where the fuck was his body? Chapter 4. Internal Nagging Questions. Have you ever thought or wondered for the slightest of a second that maybe, just maybe, something foreign was inside your body? Something that in some way entered your bloodstream undetected and then began invading, attempting to orchestrate a coup, dissecting your defenses and interpreting your responses so it could counter your reactions? Something that doesn't belong or fit with your previous, I don't know, thoughts and insides? Some would say I've introduced foreign substance into my body in the form of poisonous inks every time I come out of royal ink. They would argue Matt's artwork inlaid just under the surface of my skin is a voluntary risk of foreign invasion. While this may be true, I don't believe the colored inks could slowly overtake my thoughts and render me powerless in the decisions I attempt to make. To that, I call BS. They are just appended in the choices I make. I used to think that just one tat would be all I'd ever want. I could have been satisfied with that first little Irish knotted cross on my ankle, thinking it would suffice my inquisitiveness of the process. But that was before through going countless operations to put my broken body back together. Before the memories that those deep wounding scars kept reminding me of, goading me into recollections of how broken I quickly became after what I'd lost in the flutter of that fucking owl's flight into our path. I need the ink to help hide those memories so I can rebuild myself to the woman I once was, the one I long to be again. An existence without people seeing my torn and re-sewn flesh. Scars that lead them to ask stupid questions. It's my battle, goddammit, not yours. None of your prying business. Get in my way and I'll make damn sure you live to regret it. Don't tread on me or mine. I fell back into the chair. I don't know where this rising steam comes from anymore. I was once very peaceful, filled with love and wonder of the world around me. Now I fight despising it. Something is inside me and taking residence within, invading my defenses, attempting to conquer what was once mine, stealing pieces of me bit by bit. My power, my desires. I sat up straight, finding myself gasping for the air that normally came easy to breathe in naturally. If I could just chill the hell out. What is happening to me? I question myself. Who am I morphing into? This is not who I am, not what I want. I yell aloud at the top of my lungs while I search the mirror hanging on the wall at the foot of my bed. Instantly, tears blur my vision of myself. The colors of the artwork covering my body begin to swallow the image of the girl that is staring back at me. It's as if I now am merely the screen to display a moving picture reel. I remember a phrase my grandma used to tell me when she suffered pain or distress from some tragedy she faced. She would look into the heavens outside from the front porch. The swing she sat on would sway back and forth to a melody only she could hear. My sweet grandma would shake her head and repeat the same quote over and over. Lord God Almighty, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. I believed her. After all, my grandma never told a lie for as long as she lived. She wasn't capable of it. But today, as I sit in my bed staring at myself, trying to picture myself at that tender young age, the age she would see me as way back then, I believe I'm the exception that broke the rule. I don't feel this strange internal war against my soul will ever pass. It's too raging. I'm afraid my soul will instead be crucified, burnt at the stake like Joan of Arc, the painful flames licking at the soles of my feet as I cry out for mercy. And at the weakest moment, I'm engulfed in this pathetic pity party. That ruthless fucking Cheshire cat grin begins turning up at each corner of my mouth. Yes, whatever is inside me was back, and I hold no control over it. But then again, a minute later, I don't care. All I want is to satisfy its hunger once more. But this time, for real. Not just in the imagination given to me as I sleep. I feel the hunger and desire to experience the intensity and taste the salt of another human's blood. Feed the invader's desire to witness the carnage I am capable of. I hold no clue where this entity within has come from, but I kneel in submission. Tonight, the hunt will begin. My heart unrelentingly rages once more with the anticipation equal to the hunger of the masses starving within a third world country. Their collective agony of awaiting the day's rations to quell those pangs of hunger one moment longer. The crazy thing, last week, I felt none of this. That's how quick this thing has swallowed me up. I'm like Jonah and the whale. The only difference? I have no idea what the fuck this internal whale is. This alien that has engulfed me and made me theirs. Chapter 5. Reflections. I miss you, Travis. I took flowers to your gravesite today. Travis Dean Tallyman. His name rolled off my tongue nicely. Joey Ray Tallyman does too. Of course, Travis always wanted to call me Joy Ray. I never asked why, but instead told him, "Honey, I only answer to the name my daddy gave me, and Joy Ray ain't it." And then I'd laugh. His dark brown eyes would twinkle with a hint of mischief before he'd follow up with, "Joey, I'd call you Mary Mother of Jesus if I knew you'd always be mine, sweetheart. You own me, baby doll. Lock, stock, and the junk below." Then he laughed with a hint of redness in his cheeks. He was tough, but he was sensitive. In a Travis-only kind of way. I knew I just missed him. There will never be another like him. All the babes adored him at the club. Hell, all his biker brothers did too. All the way up until you crossed him. Then watch the fuck out. He never hurt me though. I don't think he had it in him. But he damn sure knew I'd be gone if he did. I don't put up with that shit, and I let him know. I told him, "Travis, you ever feel the urge to hurt a lady, you best fucking knock on some other lady's door, not mine. I'll kick your ass and crap down your throat. And you know I will." He'd smile big and respond, "I know it, Joey. A line I'd never cross. Love you, baby doll." It's funny the little memories that flood back to mind when you lose someone you never expected to lose. I laid in that hospital for 6 months, fading in and out of comas, both natural and induced, without knowing my world had been stolen from me. I laid there every night and day with Travis as if he were truly there beside me. Sometimes now I think he really was, like maybe Jesus allowed him to temporarily stay back with me until I snapped out of things. But is that possible? Or maybe he laid claim to his soul that afternoon as the demon, in the form of that owl, stole him away from me? I'll never know until we hook up again. I hope that's where he is, with Jesus. 'Cause someday I want to see him again, and I know that's where I'm going in the end. It's important to me. We never got to say goodbye, and while that wouldn't change a thing, it's that final goodbye that robs me of closure. It's why I can't empty his drawers in my dresser or take his leather jacket down from the hook on the wall by the back door. That framed picture of him and I on Blackie, our Harley. His last crystal highball glass still sits on the table beside his chair. I won't allow myself to wipe away anything that has ties to him. It's all I own to hold on to my sanity. I laughed out loud. As if this is sanity, I thought to myself. I suddenly felt the bone-stirring pain in my neck once again as it traveled down my body, reaching down into my arms. It comes from nowhere and without warning. Fucking owl demon? Seems he is always just seconds away, as if sitting on a tree limb, just waiting to swoop back down and finish his task of destroying my soul. Damn these memories. There I go, attempting to let them bed back down in my head and make me weak. I despise any sign of fragility in myself, in my bones, my body, and especially my mind. Drowning in self-pity does nothing but brew more powerlessness. This too shall pass. Chapter 6. Virgin Artwork. The Score, Travis My Old Bar, an eclectic mix of locals and tourists. Tonight, it held only 2 open seats at the bar top. The one on the left was next to some fat Sam touristy-looking slob, but sitting at the opposite end of the bar was a young, smooth, athletic type. He could be a physical challenge as he looked fairly buff. Maybe a college football jock or baseball player. God's gift to women with the wavy blondish brown hair and short stubbled beard. If he has green eyes, he's going to be my first prey, my first real kill. Not sure why I now find green eyes revolting, but I do. Maybe because that was the first color I saw after the accident. Trees with green swallowing up my world and spitting it back out with pain. I ponied up to the bar and intentionally bumped his chair with the one I was pulling out. "Sorry, is this seat taken?" I asked as I smiled and batted my eyes. He turned to me quickly at first as if he were annoyed to have his attention drawn away from the game on the television. When our eyes met, his attitude quickly changed. "Yep, bright green, the green of redwoods in the Santa Cruz Mountains. You poor asshole. You just had to own those plush green eyes." I squeezed my rounded ass in between him and the chair, rubbing it against him before hoisting myself up onto the seat. It was almost too far from the bar for me to reach. "Excuse me, gorgeous, I'll help you with that." He scooted his bar stool out and stood as if returning my action. His crotch purposely brushed up against my leg as he needled his way out and helped scoop my stool closer to the bar. "Why, thank you, A couple of seconds passed. Your name?" Cole Riley, and you're welcome anytime. You here alone tonight?" he asked before he turned back to the game as if he were trying to play it cool. A move that lasted less time than it takes a horny dog to begin humping your leg. He turned back and asked, "What are you drinking tonight? I'll order you one." My first, I thought, and laughed internally. Hell, I could suck his wallet dry and empty his card by the time the bar closed tonight if I wanted. I knew his kind. Hell, before Travis, I dated his kind. For a minute, I had another thought. It came from out of left field and deep. Why am I being such a bitch? This isn't who I am. I'm becoming one of those girls I despise. Back to the recent school of thought. I was indeed changing inside, morphing into everything I hated in others. I instantly smelled his cologne. Musky, yet slightly sweet overtones. My mouth watered for the salty metallic taste of blood. His blood. My mind instantly lost any other insignificant thoughts other than attaining my craving. Jameson, please, on the rocks. Even though my thoughts were scattered tonight, I easily seduced Cole and let him know I was going to rock his world tonight. I even gave him a hint of what was yet to come. I'm going to paint you red with your heart pumping out pulses of lust-filled blood. Poor Cole took no heed of my hidden warning. He was too full of the testosterone-induced daydreams of what he was going to get tonight when we got to his house to fully understand. He was truly going to diet tonight in a bright red terror-stricken painting of his own blood. He'd be found tomorrow lying on his blood-stained canvas of stark white sheets smeared and stained with his story of seduction and departure. His eyes fixed in a dead stare at the spot that was filled with me, stabbing the life from him as he lay confused and dying. For me, I'd just slip out after my work was done, leaving my artwork behind as a display of the horror now alive and well within Santa Cruz. A chilling virgin masterpiece of what would soon become a roving gallery filled with chilling pieces of my capabilities. Photos would adorn the walls of baffled investigators, while news spots across television screens and headlines would drive fear and morbid curiosity. My new life given to escape the pains of recovery and re-enter the world in new fashion. Cole fumbled with his keys at the front door. He dropped them twice before I reached around and held his fingers in mine as we both inserted the tip of the key into the slot. Leaning in, I breathed a short sigh of sexual exhilaration into his ear. The door quickly opened as he twisted our hands holding the key, willingly inviting me in. A move he may soon regret, if I created my painting slow enough to allow him to enjoy his victory inside of me before snuffing out his existence. Cole stumbled over to his bar, offering me a drink. I nodded in agreement as I began twisting the buttons on my blouse, poking them through the tiny holes, slowly revealing the inkwork scribed into the skin covering my breasts. His eyes widened with anticipation. "So, are you tattooed over your entire body?" he asked in a voice slightly slurred and inquisitive. "Why, yes I am, Cole. Do you like them?" I asked seductively as I opened my blouse and began removing it from my arched back. They tell my complete journey up to this point. Do you want to see that story? Yes, he answered almost immediately as he turned to face me, spilling bourbon from the bottle as he unintentionally pulled the bottle's neck away from the glass's edge. Oops, he smiled. I've never, made love to a woman with tattoos all over her body. I'm ready to see what it's like, though. Slightly offended by his candor, stating he would like to see what it was like, made my thought about the choice I had made. Now reassured I'd been correct. I was going to enjoy making him my first kill and how it was going to feel. It was going to be rewarding. I set my glass back onto the table without even tasting its contents. I wouldn't call what we're going to do making love. We're going to fuck, and I don't need anything else to fill me but what you already have down here. My hand traveled quickly south to the overly excited part of his body. Cole fumbled, attempting to set his glass and bottle of Jameson back onto the tabletop. Both toppled to their sides and began spilling over the table's edge, but he barely took notice of the mess as I wiggled my hips, shaking my skirt down around my ankles. The race to his bedroom was furious, caution thrown to the wind, our clothes scattered in a trail from the bar stools in his living room to the bed overlooking the lit boardwalk. Cole never noticed me sliding the stiletto under the pillow. His attentions on watching the artwork dance across my naked flesh was too titillating for his eyes to look away. I almost felt bad for him. The entire act so far was like shooting ducks in a pond. It was amazing how close to my dream this event was playing out. His body was chiseled, and I must admit I enjoyed the sensations he was providing me. It had been so long since I'd been with someone. It felt like a shame to end it, but I rolled him over onto his back and slowly crawled on top, grinding my pelvis against his. As he entered me, I began the dream dance while my arms stretched out forward toward his pillows, fingers of my right hand searching for what would be used as my paintbrush in his creative end. Our bodies heaved with an intensity I'm not certain I've ever felt as I leaned farther forward, my breasts pushing against his face. My fingers continued to reach for the hidden blade. It was over so fast. I don't believe Cole felt a thing after the third or fourth puncture into his chest. His head fell back onto his pillow, and as I rolled off him, the words I'd spoken became truth. His heart truly spurted out streams of warm red blood and slowing pulses. His gaze became hollowed, and the shock and fear quietly slipped away into a calm vacancy, a few fading wisps of breath being vanquished from his lungs, and he was gone. The actual kill had ended too quickly and abruptly to fill my new much-expected sensations. I would need to learn to pace myself in the future. As I put my clothing back on and gathered my things, I walked back to the bed and surveyed my first painting I was about to leave behind. A feeling of disappointment washed over me as I stared at the growing red pool of blood soaking into the white cotton sheets. I'd held no previous knowledge of how much blood a body held. I now knew it was quite a bit as I contemplated my act and the force that had come over me to complete it. The oddness of the moment was that as I looked into Cole's eyes, which seemed to stare blankly at the ceiling without expression, I suddenly saw Travis's face, and he smiled at me. I believed it was only inside my head or somehow echoing throughout my body, but I swear I heard his voice as it spoke to me. It gets better, babe. Next time, do a woman. Just for me, baby doll. My first reaction was a sharp pain in my gut followed by the need to retch, but I turned and walked out through Cole's door, and by the time it quietly closed, I'd warmed up to the idea. Was the alien I suspected was inside of me Travis? A side of Travis I never knew? Chapter 7. Adding to the Gallery. It's amazing that the phrase, practice makes perfect, is so true. I was becoming quite proficient and causing a new sensation of fear throughout the Santa Cruz area in a very short time. The authorities couldn't understand what had taken over their town so quickly. A madman or a team of home invaders. There were no profilers able to come up with a typical outline of a suspect that fit each crime scene they now were investigating. Of course, there was also the fact I myself could not formulate what was happening either. I didn't know what was driving me into this new hunger I'd become a part of. Physically, I shouldn't be able to have the strength. Mentally, I couldn't begin to explain what was going on inside my head. Travis's voice became stronger inside my brain or soul, but I couldn't fathom why. How did he fit into this chaotic craziness? Was this me acting out because I blamed him for not being here? Or for the accident? It was that damned owl's fault. I soon began leaving an image of an owl brushed on the wall with blood using a small paintbrush. I wasn't sure why, but it did create quite a stir with the cops and media. It threw another question other than the fact both men and women were being found murdered in their beds. Now there was hand-painted images of owls being left on the victims' walls. I finally believed I was on track to finding out something that may help explain things. I'd visited my doctor, and for the first time I asked a question that seemed to hit the nail on the head. So, Doc, I feel pretty good physically, at least. You know, most of the time. Better than I ever believed possible for sure. My mind was fighting inside with not letting too much information escape my lips. I wasn't certain I should tell him just how physical I could become at times. The broken and repaired nerves and bones would also help with any alibi I may ever need to call upon if my prints or something were ever matched at a scene. After all, I'm the helpless, wounded, and crippled woman who survived the decapitation of her fiancé in a horrible and traumatic motorcycle accident several years back. What better cover could one have? And the scars and medical records to prove it. But I'm wondering, I have a question, Doc. Yes, Joey, ask away. I'll tell you whatever I can in a straightforward fashion. You know that to be true. I haven't pulled any punches up to this point, no matter how painfully true they may be or answers you don't want to hear.
I know, Doc Peterson, and that's why I feel like I can ask you this.
I paused, searching for careful wording.
Do you believe there could be some kind of alien, not an alien like from outer space, but alien matter as not normally belonging?
Joey, I think I'm sensing what you are trying to ask. It's the one subject I have been troubled about telling you, especially since you are so close, or I should say, we're so close to Travis. I've thought better of letting you know until I felt you may be mentally ready to hear what I'm about to tell you.
Okay, Doc, I have to say I'm almost afraid now to hear what you have to say.
Don't be, Joey. It's not a bad thing. It's what's kept you alive and from suffering even more.
Doc, you're not going to tell me that I've been a part of some sort of biological experiment, are you? Where I've been recreated in some clandestine lab or something, and now you need me to carry out contracts, are you? I asked hesitantly, but with a slight sense of humor to cover up my sudden discomfort from the topic. After all, I've seen the movies where shit like this happened. Was it real, though? I laughed, but questioned semi-seriously. I am still all human, aren't I? No monkey parts or...
No, Joey. Nothing like that at all.
Dr. Peterson smiled, followed by a short guffaw.
The procedure used on you has been done many times before, for quite a while. It's called a cadaver bone transplant.
He hesitated a moment and watched me. I presumed to get my reaction before he would continue. I smiled, but honestly, I was beginning to become concerned. Did I have a killer's bone in biology inside of me? Could this be what was causing these desires to kill people invade my mind to a point I'd lost control of myself and was enjoying it?
It's really a simple and effective procedure, Joey. You see, we take the bone chips of a donor that matches blood type and biological makeup, and we build a cage around the fractured or destroyed bone in the patient's body. We then fill the cage with the matched bone chips and let them meld and grow into the patient's natural tendency to heal itself. The cadaver donor's bones help strengthen and fill in where your bone makeup wouldn't suffice. It then becomes a rather symbiotic mating, meaning the patient needs the cadaver's bone makeup and material to fully heal to its best possible outcome, while the cadaver's bones need the nutrients and things that the patient's body creates to maintain surviving and growing new bone. It's a perfect marriage of a rather simple solution to a complex problem when so much bone and density is destroyed in a patient. It not only speeds recovery time, but strengthens the patient's new bone growth density with the attributes of the donor's bone material. I literally sat in the chair dumbfounded. That's of course boiled down to the simplest layman's terms that I can come up with in a moment's notice. The fact is, finding a donor that works is many times the most difficult part of the equation to overcome. Many times, so doc, let me get this straight. I have someone else's bone matter inside me, making my bones heal and become stronger than if they weren't available and inside me? Simple answer, yes, Joey. If we had been unable to have found a matching donor so quickly, you would more than likely not have been able to walk in here today on your own accord. It would have taken much more time if it were even possible at all. I believe the donor's bone literally saved your life and improved the quality of such that you are now living. So, have there ever been any complications or added surprises or things that weren't expected? I know it's a crazy question, but are you talking something like taking on some of the donor's traits or abilities? Habits? That's exactly what I'm asking, Doc. I felt very different lately. Like maybe there is something alien inside me. Again, no seed pods or anything like that. Just, I know I sound crazy, but I've heard of a case or two in the past. Patients claiming that they feel those sensations too. Like they have new character traits that didn't exist before, but in my professional opinion, I don't believe that to be possible. Not for a minute. Not physically possible. Now, there may be the possibility your mind is playing tricks, so to say, with you, or you perhaps are reading things into non-existent issues, maybe not seeing coincidence as just that, possibly. Am I able to know who my donor was so I could thank their family? Joey, usually that is up to the family to say if they want the recipient to know who donated. But in this case, there was no family we were able to contact for permission. Only the donor's signature on the back of their driver's license. And that is what has kept me from letting you in on the who until you yourself asked. Who, Doc? Whose bones are inside my body? Who is responsible for saving me? I think you should probably sit down before we talk. Chapter 8. A flood of questions. I couldn't think. The off-white walls began closing in around me. Claustrophobia was new to me, but I sensed that must be what I was feeling. I instantly felt too much overwhelming emotion along with a multitude of new questions filling my brain. I was mentally drowning. My coping mechanism was being triggered. I'd been experiencing internal battles for several months. Hell, several years since the accident. But now the inside of my head was the battlefront in a war I knew nothing of survival. The demilitarized zone was in the rearview mirror, but I had no intentions of backtracking to any safe zone no matter what happened from this point on. I was just told in not so many words that the spoils of my existing war so far were mere trophies given to me by my true love through the gift of his cadaver bone chips. It was his battles of the hunt I had taken over, but I had held no idea of the activities he was into before now. Travis had somehow kept his dark secret of killing for fun from me. I was now just a mere extension of the sickness he had harbored covertly through the transfer from his bones to mine. As I sat in the now cold and stark doctor's office, my brain attempted to decipher the information I had just received. I was shocked.
I was angry with Travis for doing what he was doing while he claimed to love only me. I was pissed at Doc Peterson for not telling me this now damning information, but for using Travis's fucking cadaver bone to begin with. My life had been a roller coaster since the wreck, and I think now I'd rather be homebound and crippled, free from this new curse, rather than to have succumbed to it and lost my power of choice. And then I felt it coming. It was as if my internal thoughts of conflict had awoken the beast within. I tried to fight the feeling washing across my face as I prayed Doc would be looking away as the smile roared in like the incoming tide. My lips quickly began their trek, defeating my will to refrain from the widening and stretching of my face until my entire mouth full of teeth stuck out. My giveaway, my tell, my Cheshire cat grin, pearly whites shining like a troupe of bright white Broadway dancers stretched out across center stage with bright lights drawing attention. I quickly turned and ducked my head to cover up the unwelcome and maddening smile.
Joey, are you okay?
Doc Peterson asked as he attempted to survey the look as it washed over my face. I'm fine, Dr. Peterson, I quickly spit out. My body is healing at a faster pace each day. I'm glad to hear I was able to retain a small bit of Travis to keep with me, like a memento or tribute. I forced the repugnant smile to withdraw slightly, and now know he didn't just leave me without being able to take care of me the only way he was able to. I allowed my smile to show just a little. The grin was just a reaction from a memory I recalled, a moment we shared together a long, long time ago. In fact, it was an entire lifetime ago. It'll take some time for everything to settle in and gel within my little world, my psyche. As you certainly know by now, I'm ninja strong. I'm nobody's little bitch. My father saw to teaching me that before he left this cruel world. I reckon I'll be carrying on his tradition along with a little of my much-loved Travis's from now on. Thank you, Dr. Peterson. I'll see you next checkup, right? I winked along with my damned smile. I'm feeling good enough that I believe I could even ride occasionally. Dr. Peterson looked up from the chart in his hand.
Now, Joey, don't be getting too far ahead of yourself. While I'm a firm believer of getting back on the horse eventually.
I smiled and laughed. Oh, I'm not climbing on the biggest horse. Maybe start out with a little Sportster and work my way up. The spot of my neck began its burn and slow movement down to my arms. It was the sign the hunt would soon be calling my name again. Now, instead of just some vacant, unexplainable desire within my soul calling me to kill, I was now able to attach a name to it, and I quietly whispered aloud just under my breath, "It's okay, Travis. I'll see you tonight. We'll shred one together. This time, you pick her out." I could feel the continued burn in my cheeks as my smile grew wider once more. The Cheshire Panther was clawing at my soul, hungry for a prowl through the Santa Cruz nightlife. Somewhere tonight, I'd be painting a bedroom crimson red, adding another work of art to my roving gallery along with a bloody sketch of an owl in flight. It would be a real newsworthy killer of a story for the morning or afternoon news. The boardwalk lights seemed extra bright while the bar traffic heavier than normal. My eyes darted back and forth in search of my desire. Across the pier, a beautiful brunette drew the lighter to her cigarette. The flick of the steel against the flint brought the flame dancing in the green pools of her irises. I heard his inner voice inside my soul.
"That's the one, Joey. I can see it now."
I nodded to Travis as if he were standing near me and spoke in a whisper as I slowly walked across the wooden planks to make my move. "This one's for you, baby doll. I hope you enjoy my work." The woman's lighter flickered before dying out, unable to relight as she rolled the small steel wheel across the flint again. I pulled the Zippo from my jeans pocket, flipping the lid open and running it up my leg until the flame came alive all in one fluid motion. I lifted it to the tip of her cigarette and said, "Your lucky night, honey. I'm a sucker for green eyes. What's your name?" "Sasha Kingsley. What's yours?" "Joey Ray." I smiled, showing my perfect teeth. "Great night for drink, don't you think?" "Well, Joey Ray, I never say no to a Jameson. I just happen to know a sweet little dive where we can get a couple of those.
And I know a place we could maybe end up tonight after closing time. Sweet. I could use some company tonight. Do you like paintings? I have a gallery of my own that your likeness would fit perfectly.
Look out for their eyes, Mom. That's the first thing you'll see. Standing in the middle of a forest in the dead of a winter's night was usually not my preferred method to wind the day down. With the canopy of branches overhead, the only light came from our headlamps, illuminating the twisted, woody layer above in little white discs. Our vaporous breath rose up and phased through the beams like ascending spirits. With it being too cold for insects and most other animals, the forest was quiet and still. It had not even been perturbed by the signature cry of what we had hiked out to try and find.
What color are their eyes?
Mom asked. I don't know. They'll glow in our lights. You'll see them then. Mom spun in a slow circle, her headlamp scouring the branches. I resumed my search. All I saw were shadows and dull, fibrous hues of gray. I had no idea where Mom's fascination with owls came from. We always heard them back at home, barred owls we eventually learned, but as for seeing one? It didn't happen in my childhood years, and it certainly isn't happening now that I have my own place in the city. As for Mom, her early bedtime habits didn't help her chances, and now, pushing 85 years old, her odds are literally slipping away.
This is a wild place,
Mom said for the third time that night.
They're here. They're just too smart for us.
I grunted in response. Perhaps she had a point. Back at home, maybe the streetlights and occasional passing car kept the owls out of sight, confined to the woods on the fringes of our subdivision. But we weren't at home now. These woods were a part of Mount Kinnear in West Virginia, barely 100 feet from the rental cabin we were vacationing at. It was only night 2, but Mom had wanted to embark into the woods each time the sun went down to try and see an owl. I had only joined her out of necessity. She never wanted to admit it, but a slip and fall at her age would be disastrous. Or, God forbid, she got turned around and wandered aimlessly into the darkness. I shuddered against the cold. Spring hadn't quite sprung yet. We had initially planned to head out to the cabin in April, but circumstances had compelled us to reschedule for a little earlier. As a distraction, I presume. I made to readjust my headlamp. My fingers were solid and numb, the bridge of my nose stinging. We had to go in. If I was freezing, Mom was 2 steps away from an ice cube. Come on, we're heading in, I goaded. Mom shook her head.
Where are you, owls?
We can try again tomorrow night, I urged, gently grabbing her shoulder. Come on in, please. It's getting cold fast. Mom resisted me for a brief moment, but finally she turned and walked with me, forearm in my grasp, out of the forest and onto the cabin's back porch. The temperature change was like stepping into a basin of bath water. I sighed with relief, rubbing my hands while Mom wandered upstairs to her room. You going to bed? I asked.
I'm tired,
was her reply. The door snapped shut behind her without another word. I retreated to the downstairs guest room, sinking onto my bed. This distant attitude was nothing new, especially in the wake of our recent loss. I had hoped that time away from the old house would be spiritually refreshing, an excuse to forget about our home life for a week and experience something new. How terribly my hopes would come to pass. My dreams were full of scratching mice and nails on chalkboards. When I woke up, it was still pitch black outside, yet the scratching continued. The timbre was unmistakable. Something was outside my window. In a half-asleep daze, I shambled over to the window and drew the blinds up. I nearly screamed. The face pressed into the glass was pale, round, and yellow-eyed. Its expression was of penetrating severity, animalistic, but with conviction of an eerily human degree. It was only after taking a horrified step back that I realized what it was, and my fear melded into awestruck fascination. Even I knew what this was, having seen enough of the Harry Potter films. And even I knew that snowy owls weren't normally found this far south. Yet here one was. Muscular and glossy white, gilded with mottled charcoal. Hunched and serene, it cocked its head, scratching the window with its wicked black talons. "Holy shit," I whispered. I considered rushing to the other room and waking up Mom. I knew she wouldn't appreciate it, and rousing from early sleep was a trial at her age, but this was no ordinary barred owl. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see something truly special. I took my chance and threw the door open, rushing for the stairs. But there was no need. Every downstairs light was on. Mom was awake and pacing the kitchen, dressed in her Sunday finest. I looked at the oven clock. 2:30 in the morning. The air was thick with perfume and shampoo. She really had made an effort to look her best for church.
"Fran,"
she scolded upon seeing me.
"why aren't you dressed? Mass starts in an hour."
"Mom," I replied, "it's a Wednesday morning. You attend the Sunday service."
"And wake your father, too."
She fussed, resuming her pacing.
"I swear if I told him not to drink the night before church once, I've told him 1,000 times.
I grimaced. My nightgown felt hot and itchy against my skin. "Mom, Dad passed away last month, remember?" She stopped. There was a confused scowl on her face. The various aromas were becoming nauseating.
"No,"
she muttered.
"he picked you up from school the other day. You had a basketball game. You won. You scored the winning goal."
I buried my face in my palm. It was accelerating. Dad's death had only served to worsen it, and it coming around in full swing while on vacation was further proof of its grip on her. "Mom, listen to me," I said slowly. "I'm 53. I haven't lived at home for over 30 years. Right now, we're at Mount Kinnear on vacation. We were looking for owls earlier tonight, remember? We went into the woods. It was cold. I told you to look out for their eyes." Mom placed her hand on her cheek. It drifted to her sun hat, which she listlessly pulled off. She fumbled with the brim.
"Yes, that's right. Everybody's gone. Gone away here and there."
I stepped up to her, cradling her hands in mine. "There's an owl outside my window, a snowy owl. Do you want to see it?" Her skin felt dry and lukewarm to the touch, her bones like flimsy bits of straw.
"Okay,"
she muttered. I led her into my room. I shouldn't have been surprised to only find the void of night beyond the glass. My mom stared at the window in silence.
"There's nothing there,"
she said rather obviously. "There was," I insisted. "It's gone now. Maybe it'll come back later if we keep a lookout."
"I'm tired,"
said Mom. She pulled her hand from my grasp and meandered back upstairs. I listened to her muffled footsteps, the subdued creak of bed springs. I could tell she hadn't even bothered to take her church clothes off. I slipped back into bed myself. It shocked me how quickly the vagrant owl had fled my mind, how it had been ousted by reality. I closed my eyes, heart heavy with regret. A whole army of snowy owls meant nothing next to Mom's dementia. I'd seen and heard enough in my years to recognize that the end wasn't just approaching, it was in its final sprint. I tossed and turned that night, the rickety bed frame like talons tapping on glass. Mom was an early bird, so it was no surprise to wake up to the smell of burnt toast and the sounds of her labored chewing. It had snowed briefly sometime earlier that morning. All of the outside had been given a light powdered sugar dusting. I emerged from the guest bedroom, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Good morning, Mom." I blinked, realizing she was still in her church clothes, marred with wrinkles and creases. You want to think about changing out of those clothes?" Mom swallowed her mouthful of crust, then looked down.
Oh, goodness me. Did I really go to sleep in my Sunday finest?
I shrugged and offered a sad smile. Yeah, I think you did.
Was there a dinner party last night that got a bit too crazy?
She joked. Something like that, I sighed.
I whipped up some toast for you. I know you like it on the darker side.
She motioned towards a paper towel on the other side of the table. Something that looked like a flattened charcoal briquette sat on top of it. Appreciate it, Mom, I said, deciding to just settle with coffee.
With all the fresh snow, it'll be easier to see the owls,
Mom suggested.
They'll stand out against all this white.
That's true, I said. Unless it were a snowy owl, I guess. I saw one last night, remember? Mom set her toast down, thinking.
When we were out in the woods, why didn't you tell me?
Never mind, I said, putting on the coffee pot.
No toast for you, then?
Mom asked.
Is it overdone? I'm sorry, I don't quite have my touch like I used to.
Don't worry about it, Mom, I said, gripping the countertop. I waited there in silence, expecting an answer, but only the brittle crunch of toast followed. I took my steaming mug outside, distracting myself with the newly christened woods. The snow continued to fall, no signs of abating. Despite the coffee, I found myself nodding off, thanks to the rhythmic pattering of snowflakes on the metal roof. Any other day, I'd have deemed myself content, cozy even. The night before, however, kept me rooted in wakeful wariness. Mom joined me a few minutes later, sitting down with her own cup of coffee. Thankfully, she had gotten into more comfortable clothes.
Isn't it beautiful?
She said.
Back in Wisconsin, your father and I loved when the first snow of the season came. Weren't any trees where we were, just flat, rolling hills for miles. I couldn't believe all that white. He used to say it was like a blank canvas. The slate's been wiped clean, he'd tell me. What kind of painting will you make?
Mom chuckled and glanced at me.
Then you came along. You were the painting that changed everything. We moved down south. Things weren't as wide open, and the snow never seemed to stick as well.
She sighed, taking a doleful sip of coffee. I didn't know what to say. Mom's lucid moments, rare as they were these days, weren't always welcome.
But all the snow in the world couldn't make up for you,
she continued.
Seeing you with all this snow just tells me how much things have changed, and that there's a lot more to come.
I smiled and made some casual remark in response. Mom knew she was old and did not fear death as far as I could tell. How much of it was awareness versus senility, however, was unclear. That day wouldn't be pretty. That much was clear. To my complete lack of surprise, Mom wanted to head out and look for owls again. The snow had stopped by mid-afternoon, and the overcast skies had brought upon darkness even earlier than typical for the season. Yet the snow seemed to glow, nearly negating the need for headlamps. Donning our boots, we crunched out into the frosted woods, eyes peeled for rounded shadows or fluttering wings. The rich contrast of dark wood on light snow was dazzling and disorienting, like a most beautiful hall of mirrors. It was even colder than the night before, but it was a pillowy, crystalline coldness, like the snow it harbored. We arrived roughly around the same spot as last time, peering up and looking out for eyes. The silence was broken by random clumps of snow falling to the ground. It was strangely reassuring, like some benevolent force was reminding us that it wasn't all lonely and dead out there in the woods. I turned, aiming my light just above Mom's head, and I saw it. 2 glowing yellow eyes set against a white rounded face nestled in a high branch.
Mom, look! There it is,
I whispered. In my excitement, my light dipped, and the snowy owl took off, its luminous wings stretching out nearly to my height. It soared over us, landing on the tree behind me. "Turn around," I goaded. "Quick!" Mom had barely processed what had happened. She was still staring at the spot my headlamp had been shining upon first. She pivoted awkwardly on the spot, looking at where I was pointing. It had taken flight again. Now it was to my immediate right.
"Where?"
Mom croaked.
"I don't see."
"This way," I said. I readjusted my beam to fix on the owl, now barely 10 feet up the next tree. It only took a split second for my heart to sink into liquid panic. The owl's fiery eyes were wide, yet pointed into a fearsome glare. Its feathers flared like the hairs on a cat. Its wings torqued, its head dipped. With a metallic screech, it flung itself from the branch and pounced. It was the uncanny glint of its brandishing talons that finally forced me to act. I grabbed Mom's coat and yanked her towards me. She stumbled with a cry into my arms, and the force carried me to the snowy ground. The owl brushed past, its wings like a feather duster made of fiberglass slashing at my face.
"Oh my God, what's going on?"
Mom cried, struggling in my grasp. "Hold on, I gotta get you out of here," I urged, throwing my arm over her scalp. "Follow me and keep your head down." We staggered through the trees, but just ahead the owl circled among the trunks like a ghostly jet, then launched its talons forward again with a scream, its wings forming a veritable wall in our path. Those black claws sank through my coat sleeve like butter and pierced my skin. The pain was blinding, like fish hooks scrubbing inside my flesh. Crying out, I swiped at it with my free arm, striking its flank. It hissed before taking off again, those startlingly huge wings stupefying me. It coasted upwards and vanished among the branches, leaving behind a flurry of feathers. "Come on, let's go," I blurted. A breathless moment later, we had left the tree line, the safety of the house barely 30 feet off. As I herded Mom towards the back porch, I stole a look back. The night sky was a deep, starless gray, but the snowy owl was a blizzardy demon rising above the treetops, wings fully spread like a crusading angel. Even in the low light, I saw those amber eyes staring into me. Then it flapped its wings and dissipated into the clouds with an echoing screech. "Go, go, go," I muttered, my throat seizing up, helping her up the threshold and through the back door. A cold breeze smacked at the outside walls, rattling the entire cabin before I finally slammed the door shut. "Holy shit," I gasped, locking the door. "Mom, are you okay?" She had collapsed into a chair, a hand over her heart, murmuring something under her breath. "Talk to me," I pleaded, grabbing her hands. "Please, talk to me."
"Get off,"
she snapped, wringing her wrists from my grip. I jumped backwards as if I'd been slapped. We gaped at each other in silence, heaving with sharp, labored breath. A tear finally broke through with me. Mom blinked.
Oh, my dear. What's the matter?"
She rose to her feet and hobbled towards me, wrapping me in a hug.
"It's okay, Fran. It's okay."
"I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice muffled against her neck. When she finally released me, I pulled off my jacket and examined my forearm. It was smeared red with blood, and before my eyes 5 puncture wounds oozed pea-sized crimson blobs.
"Oh my goodness,"
Mom said, her hand on her heart again.
"Let me help you, sweetheart."
She rummaged through her purse sitting on the counter and removed a scattered handful of Band-Aids. I let her go about her fussing. Her lashing out was still fresh in my mind. Anything to make her act motherly again, like I was still her daughter.
"There,"
she finally said, applying what must have been the 20th Band-Aid over my wounds. They were already darkening with blood.
"How does that feel?"
The owl's talons still stung like mad, but I didn't let it show in my face. "Better. Thanks, Mom." I hugged her again. That goddamn owl was crazy.
"Don't you use the Lord's name in vain,"
Mom scolded. "Sorry. That owl was crazy. I don't know what had gotten into it."
"An owl did this?"
Mom gasped. "Yes, out in the woods. That's why we ran, I prompted.
I didn't even see it happen,
She whispered, shaking her head.
Dear me, what a night.
It's been a rough night for both of us, I sighed. Do you want me to build a fire?
I'm tired,
said Mom. She then turned and headed upstairs without another word. I listened for her door to close, then ripped off the Band-Aids and ran my forearm under the faucet, rinsing my wounds with soap and water. I gritted my teeth against the searing needles. Of all the insanity that transpired tonight, there was only one useful takeaway. We weren't going to go out looking for owls anymore.
This episode of Chilling Tales for Dark Nights is brought to you by Best Fiends. My wife is onto me these days. Back then, I used every excuse in the book to slink off and disappear. I'd tell her I had to work late on some project, or that I had to meet with a client somewhere, or I'd tell her I had to run to the store because we were out of milk, and I'd sneak back home in the wee hours of the morning and crawl quietly into bed. It was only a matter of time until she found out I knew. So one day, I decided to level with her. Honey, I've been playing Best Fiends, I said. Long story short, now she plays more than I do. You've heard of the game, right? It's the best match 3 puzzle/adventure game you'll ever play. Free to download on Apple and Google Play. Everyone loves a good match 3 game, but this one's on another level. Imagine you and your band of fiends, the good guys, are on a mission to blow the bad guys, the slugs, off picturesque Mount Boone. By matching 3 or more identical objects on your game board, your fiends unleash hell. String enough together and they unleash Slugmageddon. Your merry band of fiends begin the game as babies, but as you collect the spoils of war, you can power them up and evolve them into new forms. You'll meet dozens of new fiends along the way and choose your favorite lineup for battle. Each level gets a little more challenging, and the victories get sweeter and sweeter. What I love about Best Fiends is it's like a mashup of a puzzle game and an old-school RPG. It's fun to unlock brand new fiends and watch them mature and transform. You'll be grinding for levels just to watch them grow. Every chance you get, you'll be dipping in for another level or 2. No internet or Wi-Fi required, by the way. And once you get in the zone, forget about it. It's Best Fiends till the wee hours of the morning. You don't need to be a gamer to play Best Fiends, by the way. It's fun for the whole family. You'll all be bragging around the dinner table about what level you're on. Not me, of course. I never brag. If I did, though, I'd tell you I was level 200. Sounds pretty impressive, I know. But keep in mind, there are thousands of levels. There are also brand new events and challenges that pop up year-round with chances to earn exclusive in-game items, characters, and rewards. Speaking of rewards, I'm so grateful my wife came around. You know, I'll never forget the day she gave birth to my son. Probably the most amazing moment of my life. The very instant he took his first breath, I had just launched a Slugmageddon attack. We named him in kind, Sluggo for short. So download your new favorite getaway, Best Fiends, for free today on the App Store or Google Play. You'll even get $5 worth of in-game rewards when you reach level 5. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Thank you for your support and for supporting our valuable sponsors.
I awoke to the sound of my mother dying. At least, that's what I thought, as I woke up as suddenly as if I'd been drenched in ice water.
Help! Oh my God, help me!
I flew upstairs and into her bedroom. Mom was coiled in her bedsheets, writhing like a beached fish, thrashing her head against the pillow.
Please, help me! It's back! It's back! Oh God, no!
I ran over to her side and shook her. Mom, it's a nightmare, wake up! Her bouts of night terrors were nothing new either, but forcing her out of them was always a heart-wrenching ordeal. "It's Fran, Mom. There's nothing here."
"Don't let it take me,"
she cried. I had to stop myself from slapping her. "Wake up now," I commanded, trying to wrench the sheets off of her. She suddenly shot up, fully alert.
"Where am I? Who are you? I don't know you."
"I'm your daughter, Fran. Remember?" I shouted, unable to restrain my fears, my frustrations. "Remember me!"
"I have no daughter. My family's dead,"
she spat, curling away from me.
"They're all dead, and I'm next. It's coming for me. It's outside right now."
"Mom, I'm here," I cried. But my voice died as my eyes broke from her and darted over to the window. Its face was pressed into the glass, yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. I could see down its throat, florid and ravenous. I swear I could hear the snowy owl laugh. "Get away!" I roared, crossing over to the window and banging on the glass. It flapped those huge wings but remained rooted in place. I laid flat-handed blows on the panes right over it. The owl was unfazed.
"Stop it. I want to die,"
Mom wailed. "Enough of this," I snapped. I left my floundering mother in the bedroom and stomped downstairs to the fireplace, grabbing the only weapon my frenzied mind could comprehend. Wasting no time, I barged outside, my adrenaline a force field of heat against the bitter, soggy cold. The snowy owl was still plastered over my mother's bedroom window. Her screams had taken on a muffled, haunting quality. "Get out of here!" I shouted, wielding the poker like a sword. The owl ignored me. Some snide voice cut through the panic, chiding me for assuming the owl would listen. "Shut up," I told it back. "It found us, didn't it? There's something weird about this bird." I took a breath, tensed my arm, drew back and launched the poker with all my strength. "Leave her alone!" The clang was like a church bell. Snow dislodged from the roof and nearby trees. The owl went still. For an incredulous instant, I thought I had actually made contact. I expected it to drop pitifully to the ground, its white coat broken and deepening with the red of death. It turned its head all the way around. Once more, I was met with those eyes. The air between us just folded, and suddenly it was on top of me. Spread out flat in the snow like a crime scene, the weapon gone from my hand, I could only stare in horror at the owl striding over me. It had grown. It was the size of a tiger now, its massive wings enveloping me in a feathery shroud. It stared right back, with eyes the size and color of lemons, those cavernous pupils swallowing me whole. The hiss billowing from its beak was an abyssal rattle like the mother of serpents. It squeezed my arms with its scaly feet, pinning me down. It lowered its neck. "No!" I managed to cry, but that scythe-like beak stabbed downward. I'd never been shot before, but I've read about what it's like. It's not just the pain of entry. It's your innards absorbing the force of the round and jostling loose, liquefying. You literally shatter from the inside. That's what it was like. Feeling that demonic owl dig through my breast and scrape against bone. The agony was excruciating. I knew I'd die. I just knew I'd die right there on that snowy night. There was the sickening crack of my ribs splintering and breaking under its strength. Burning blood poured down my sides as a million raining knives massacred my chest and my skull. Everything else was twisted and strained from screaming. It finally lifted its face from the hole in my body. Something was struggling in its beak. I thought it was alive, something malformed and premature, but each movement was disturbingly rhythmic. 2 squirms, stillness. 2 squirms, stillness. A pulse, a heartbeat. The realization brought only darkness. The owl took flight, my heart trailing blood and shredded sinews underneath it. I weakly reached out for it, my arm trembling as I tried to touch it, to reclaim what was stolen. Death came quickly. It was the best sleep I ever knew. Waking up in my bed the next morning shouldn't have surprised me as much as it did. It had all felt so real. I had truly experienced the pain of death, of animalistic mutilation. I felt cursed with forbidden knowledge, unworthy to be walking around and breathing, burdened with what I knew. Instinctively, I ran my hand down my forearm, grazing over the band-aids I had applied myself. That had definitely been real, the first attack. Maybe it was broody or territorial. I don't know. I didn't really care, to be honest. Mom's episode from the night before hit me next, and I sprung out of bed. But I heard the characteristic noises of her shuffling through the kitchen. She didn't sound injured or impeded in any way. I knew her well enough to tell. If that had been real, it had clearly de-escalated. I headed to the bathroom and gazed into the mirror. As if hypnotized, I pulled back my nightgown to reveal nothing. Unmarked, unblemished skin. Well, maybe that wasn't entirely accurate, as age and time spared no one. But no indication that some beastly owl had ripped through my chest and bitten out my heart. Satisfied, I took to removing the band-aids. They unstuck rather painlessly, and I turned on the faucet to dab away any fresh blood. No blood. Not even any scabbing. I could see straight down the wounds inside my arm. I brushed my fingertips across the wounds. No pain. Scowling, I pressed a nail into the soft flesh. It elicited no sensation, no fresh stream of blood. I jabbed the skin on my other forearm. I felt nothing. I laid my palms on my face. I was cold, ice cold. Finally struck with a horrible thought, I pressed my finger to my neck. I waited, counting. "My God," I whispered. "No." Readjusting my gown, I rushed into the kitchen where Mom was picking at her burnt toast. "Mom, quick, can you feel my heartbeat?" It took her a while to set her breakfast down and look up. "What?" "I don't feel my pulse," I said. "I feel nothing." Mom cocked her head as she stared at me. "And you are?" I sighed. "Fran, I'm Fran, your daughter." Mom looked away. "I don't have a daughter." I took a deep breath. "My name is Fran Wilcox. I was born to you, Marie Bernard Wilcox, on January 3rd, 1969. My father, your husband, was Dave Wilcox, who passed away January 14th of this year." Mom pushed away her toast. She then looked back at me. "No, you're just another ghost." She ignored me as I rushed to the kitchen counter and drew a steak knife from the rack, slicing it across my palm. It cut through my flesh as easily as a slab of raw pork. I could see the flayed skin, the reddish layers underneath. No blood, no pain. I checked my pulse again. No, please God, no. I stormed outside. The snow was still on the ground. I could see perfectly where I had struggled. The discarded black poker sticking out of the ground, and bizarre markings to the sides of my impressions, like giant wings taking off. I trembled at the knees, but not from the cold. In a traumatized haze, I wandered back inside, hand over my heart, or where it used to be. Mom was lolling in her chair, cringing away from me. "You're letting in the cold," she growled. "Try as you might, but I'm still here. You're not taking me like this." "I'm not dead," I insisted. It shocked me how little of an emotional upheaval I'd mustered, trying to convince my ailing mother that her daughter wasn't some unknowable ghost should have been heartbreaking, but there was nothing there to break. "Mom, listen to me. I'm your daughter. I'm still here. My heart's been stolen." "I'm alone," she replied, shaking her head and looking around. "I'm alone in this strange place. I have nothing to say to you. Now go away. Mom, I said, laying a hand on her shoulder. She turned in her chair and backhanded me in the face. Only the force alone sent me reeling. There was no stinging pain, no upwelling of sorrow, only coldness, a strange middling thread of anger. Mom got up and hobbled into the living room.
"Nobody loves me," she muttered. "Everybody's gone. They left me because I'm old and useless and about to die."
The anger consumed me.
"Then die, you miserable bitch!"
I fled into the snowy dawn, forcing tears that never came, screaming primal roars that failed to rip apart my throat. I cursed my mother. I cursed the snow that squelched and crunched unfeelingly below my bare feet. And most of all, I cursed the mysterious, hellish raptor that had doomed me to this absurd fate. Deep in the forest, laid before me in its wintry slumber, I waited for the owl. I dared it to come for me again, to steal something else that belonged to me, that would have made me whole. Time passed. The bird didn't show. I must have spent hours in those woods waiting for the owl. I could have spent weeks, months even, haunting the forest and desiring retribution. I seemed to lack the hardware for impatience. Yet, when I finally drifted back to the cabin, not even 2 minutes had gone by. Time was cruel to something like me. I found my mother sitting in the living room, her rosary draped around one hand. She rocked in her chair, eyes closed, lips moist from nervous licking.
"Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Ah, look at what the cold blew in."
Mom glanced up from her rosary at my presence, her expression scrunched as if there were a bad smell in the air.
"You must think this is amusing. Here I am, trying to recall my sins for the last time, and you're hanging over my shoulder like a buzzard."
She frowned.
"Hail Mary, full of... oh, blast it."
She fumbled with the rosary, her fingers slipping down the decades.
"Hail Mary, full of grace. Hail Mary. Hail..."
Mom set her hands down in frustration.
"And now I can't finish my prayers. God has left me too."
"No one's left you," I whispered. "I love you. I'm here." Mom cocked her head and grunted.
"Must have been the wind. How could the wind love anything?"
She stood and shambled away from me.
"It's cold in here. So cold."
I watched her stumble about. I elicited no pity for her. Her own bitterness was infectious, filling the heartless hole in my body. Was this the owl's plan? Cursing me into watching my mother break down before me, unable to muster even the tiniest emotional response. "I don't know why this is happening," I tried saying. Mom gave no inclination that she was listening. "I didn't ask for this, though. I loved you, and you loved me back when I had my heart. If you can take one thing away from all this, it's that you matter. You matter a whole lot to a whole lot of people who are here and who aren't here. You can't live so long without mattering to people, Mom. Listen to me. I'm calling you Mom. That matters. Please, please understand." Mom lowered herself into another chair. The rosary dangled from her finger, quivering like a leaf.
"So cold," she muttered. "You sound so cold. Miserable. I don't believe you. Whatever you are, you've died twice, and I refuse to be like you."
My palms itched, thinking about grabbing and shaking her until the dusty filling spilled out of her hateful pores. I turned away, eyes closed, racking my mind for a response. "So," I finally said, "what can I do to make you believe me?" Mom shook her head.
"Leave me alone."
"No," I said. "I won't leave you like this." Mom pursed her lips. She went very still. the rosary dangled by a single bead from her fingertip. Hunting down the owl was out of the question. Getting through to my mother was impossible, especially with my current predicament. It was true, I had no love to offer. I was an empty vessel spewing empty words. But I had time. All the time and patience in the world to play out this newly assigned role. A shade, a haunting presence opposite of her, to whom time had become meaningless as well. I sat across from Mom, gazing deeply. I watched the shadows creep across the room as the hours ticked by, as the light became golden and finally faded away as night infected the cabin. Her lightly colored clothes rendered her an opaque ghost in the gloom. And through all that time, I stewed in deathly thought. Looking at my mother, all I sensed was static. Rapidly moving parts, the vague suggestion of images. She had been forgetting things for a few years now, but now it seemed she couldn't remember how to live, how to be. She was just drifting through the motions, a tumbleweed through a barren plain. Looking at my mother, staring her in the face for hours, I saw the ravages of her condition. She had completely forgotten about her family, her home, her place in the world. All the bonds she once held, splintered and dissipated into sawdust. At some point in the night, even the rosary slipped from her fingers and coiled in a knotted heap on the floor. I regarded it. Barely a few seconds earlier, it had been a source of comfort for her. It had once belonged to her mother, a medium between woman and God. Now discarded plastic and metal splayed across the carpet. It's worse than death, I realized. Living some fuzzy, vegetative half-life, reduced to mere smidgens of your reptilian brain, held together by your failing carnal husk. All the memories forged, all the love made and lost, collapsing columns of ash long behind you. Is this what I'd been overlooking? I wondered. She was suffering, or on the cusp of it. In my cursed state, forced to look at her, it was easy for me to see just how readily dementia could muddy one's spirit. Given a few more years, I realized, I wouldn't even need to have my heart stolen for her to see me this way. Maybe this isn't a curse, I thought.
Whatever you are, you've died twice.
Her voice in my mind hissed. Where had I heard those words before? It hit me, an old maxim. They say you die twice, once when you stop breathing, and once when your name is uttered for the last time. That's what it was. Her family, the world, it wasn't just dead to my mother at this point. It was twice dead. I turned to look out the window. Snow was falling again. The owl was out there somewhere, even if it refused to show itself. It was biding its time, waiting, watchful and knowing with those wise eyes. I stood up. I understand now. Do what you need to do. I won't interfere. Mom raised her head. Her bony hands gripped the armrests. Then she rose. She began to walk towards the back porch.
I'm tired,
she said. She was still slow and unwieldy, but there was a determination this time. Focus, drive. She pulled the door open and stepped out into the blistering night. I trailed her, not making a sound. I had to see it through myself. I couldn't feel the cold, but somehow I doubted she could either. Mom stopped at the edge of the black forest, obscured by the buffeting snowflakes. The only sign of life was the brief mist of her breath, catching and fading in the wind. She waited. I waited. I'm ready. I'm ready now, I declared. We both are. There were two things about owls that would come to strike me as fascinating. First, the fact that their wings and body shapes are especially designed to flight in nearly complete silence, a most wonderful adaptation for a stealthy night hunter. Second, despite their status as cultural icons all around the world, they always stand for something different depending on where you are. Misfortune, mischief, death, good luck, wisdom. They're captivating in that sense. They catch the eye and make you stop and quiet down and ponder. You walk away a different person after seeing an owl. Regardless, I think they stand for one thing no matter who you ask: change. I saw the snowy owl emerge from the trees, its broad ivory wings like iridescent paddles of light, as it soared down and landed on my mother's shoulders, soundless, graceful. It hurt to watch. I realized that with a shock. It was beginning to hurt in my chest. My neck ticked with a pulse. My palm stung. I could feel droplets of fresh blood blooming on the wound. When it took off, I had to blink. It could have been the snowstorm forming patterns. It truly looked like there was a woman in the owl's talons. She was old, peaceful and lucid, fully aware and willing of what was coming. The owl melted back into the trees. The figure it was carrying disappeared with it. Back on the ground, my mother collapsed. I rushed towards her, frigid tears on my face, my heart newly heavy and freshly crushed. The snow was cold on my feet. She was warm in my arms. I carried her back inside. Her expression was calm. She might have been asleep, dreaming of the memories she'd lost in life. I laid her on my bed. I cried long past the sunrise. Dealing with death is difficult as it is. It's messy. It's painful. It stabs you when you least expect it, sending fresh agony through your body. Few things are worse, but those few things are all too real. I saw it for myself, and I could see, looking into her face, that she had passed on knowing that she mattered, and she was loved, especially by her daughter Fran.
Chilling tales for dark nights.